He had everything, and he felt nothing. Nathan Archer, 32 years old, billionaire, the man whose face appeared on the covers of Forbes and Fortune, sat across from a woman in a worn wool coat at a restaurant where the wine list alone cost more than her monthly rent. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't impressed. She looked at him the way you look at someone you once knew very well and haven't decided yet whether you're glad to see again. "We've met before," she said quietly. Nathan smiled the polite, practiced smile of a man who meets 1,000 people a year. "I don't think so." She reached into her bag, set an old photograph on the white tablecloth between them, and said nothing else. He looked down, and something cracked open inside his chest that he hadn't felt move in years. "Like what you're seeing. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like and follow along. You won't want to miss what happens next." The evening had started, as most disasters in Nathan Archer's life did, with his sister calling at the worst possible moment. He'd been in the middle of reviewing a grid infrastructure proposal, 300 pages, dense with engineering specifications and projected carbon offset numbers, when his phone lit up with Sarah's name. He let it ring. It rang again. On the third call, he picked up because Sarah had a gift for escalating situations until he did. "You're working," she said. Not a question. "I'm always working." "It's 6:30 on a Friday, Nathan." The grid doesn't take Fridays off. He heard her exhale the specific kind of exhale she'd been perfecting since they were teenagers, the one that communicated volumes of disappointment without a single word. Sarah was 3 years older than him and had inherited their mother's talent for making silence feel like a verdict. "Lily called me today," Sarah said. Nathan set down his pen. Lily was his daughter. 7 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with marine biology, and breakfast cereal and a stuffed elephant named Gerald that had been washed so many times it was more gray than its original pale yellow. "Is she okay?" "She's fine. She called to tell me that Daddy ate dinner alone again at his desk, and that Gerald thinks Daddy is sad." Nathan closed his eyes. "Sarah, I'm not doing this to guilt you. I'm doing this because I love you, and because you've been walking through your own life like a ghost for 2 years, and I can't watch it anymore." She paused. "I set up a dinner, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, Maison Laurent on 5th. I'm not going on a blind date." "It's not a blind date, it's dinner with a friend of a friend. That's the definition of a blind date." "Nathan," her voice shifted, softer, but with a steel core underneath. "You don't have to fall in love. You don't have to feel anything. Just sit across from another human being for 2 hours and eat food that someone else cooked. Can you do that much?" He looked at the stack of proposals on his desk. He looked at the framed photograph on the corner of it. Lily, at age 4, sitting in a tide pool in Maine, laughing at something just outside the frame. Her mother, probably. Rachel had always known how to make her laugh. "Fine," he said. 2 hours. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. I'm going to hate it." "Probably," Sarah agreed. "But go anyway. Hotaka." Maison Laurent was the kind of restaurant where the lighting was designed to make everyone look slightly better than they actually were. Warm amber glow. Tables spaced far enough apart to have actual conversations without performing them for the entire room. Nathan had eaten there a dozen times for business dinners, always in the private room off the back corridor. Tonight he was at a regular table near the window, and it felt strange, exposed somehow, without the armor of a conference room setting. He arrived 7 minutes early because he arrived everywhere early. It was a habit built in the years when being late meant losing opportunities, and it had survived even now that he was the opportunity people waited for. He ordered sparkling water and looked at his phone. 14 emails in the last hour. A text from his COO about a zoning dispute in Nevada. A voice message from the head of his legal team. He put the phone face down on the table and made himself leave it there. The restaurant hummed around him. 2 women celebrating something at the bar, laughing loudly enough that the bartender smiled. An older couple near the back, eating in the comfortable silence of people who had run out of things they needed to say to each other in the best possible way. A young man near the window rehearsing what was clearly a speech in his head, his lips moving slightly. Nathan watched all of it and felt the familiar separation, the sense of being encased in glass, watching life happen at a slight remove. He was thinking about going back to the Nevada zoning email when he heard the hostess say, "Right this way, Ms. Brooks," and looked up. His first impression of Elena Brooks was that she moved like someone who was used to navigating crowded spaces. Not gracefully, not the practiced glide of women who had been trained in how to enter rooms, but efficiently. She wove between tables without bumping them. She smiled at the busboy who stepped aside for her, a real smile, quick and genuine, and he smiled back without quite knowing why. She was wearing a dark green dress that wasn't expensive but fit her well. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands around her face. She carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder. Not a clutch, not a purse, a tote bag. And when she spotted Nathan and started toward him, he noticed that she didn't adjust her expression into anything performative. She didn't beam. She didn't arrange her face into cocktail party brightness. She just looked at him, steady, evaluating. Nathan stood because his mother had raised him to stand and extended his hand. Nathan Archer. Elena Brooks. Her handshake was firm. She sat down and set the canvas tote under her chair with the practiced movement of someone who knew her belongings needed to go somewhere out of the way. "Thank you for coming," he said, and immediately felt the flatness of the phrase. "Sarah said you'd try to cancel at least once," Elena said, reaching for the water menu. "Did you?" He blinked. "I thought about it." "That's honest." She set the water menu down. "I thought about it too. I'm not really a dinner with strangers person." "What made you come?" She considered this for a moment. Actually considered it instead of giving a quick social answer. "Sarah was kind to me during a rough stretch last year. She helped me find a subletter for my apartment when I was going through some things. I figured I owed her one blind date." She described it as dinner with a friend of a friend. "That's very Sarah." The corner of her mouth lifted. "She told me you were brilliant and lonely and stubborn, and that you needed someone to talk to who wasn't trying to get something from you." Nathan felt a flicker of something, annoyance maybe, or recognition. "She said that?" "She loves you. She's worried about you." Elena looked at him directly. "I'm not here to fix you or impress you or pitch you anything. I just figured if we're both sitting here because Sarah asked us to, we might as well be honest about it." He studied her for a moment. In his experience, people who announced their honesty up front were usually performing it. But there was something in the flatness of her delivery, the absence of drama, of expectation, that didn't feel like a performance. "Okay," he said. "Honest it is." They ordered. Elena asked the server about the fish, not in the way people ask when they want to seem sophisticated, but practically, because she wanted to know if it was fresh. She ordered the chicken instead when the server admitted the halibut had come in 2 days ago. Nathan ordered the lamb without looking at the menu. "You've been here before," Elena said. "Many times. Business dinners?" "Is everything a business dinner for you?" "Most things." She nodded, without judgment. "What do you actually like to eat, when no one's watching?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which was itself strange. "Grilled cheese," he said finally. "The cheap kind. American cheese, white bread, too much butter." She smiled at that. "A real one." "That's very specific." "Lily, my daughter. She goes through phases. Last month it was grilled cheese every night for dinner. My housekeeper was appalled. I thought it was the best stretch of meals we'd had in months." "How old is she?" 7. "She's with my sister tonight, actually. Sarah arranged that too." "Efficient woman, your sister." "Terrifying mostly." Elena laughed. It was a short laugh, a little surprised, like she hadn't expected to find him funny. Nathan found he wanted to make her do it again. They talked through the appetizers, about Lily, about the strange logistics of raising a 7-year-old while running a company, about the way children had no patience for anything that wasn't immediately relevant to them, and how Nathan had found that oddly clarifying. "She said to me last week," he told Elena, "that she didn't understand why I had to go to so many meetings when meetings were just talking and you could talk anywhere." "She's right," Elena said. "I know. I couldn't explain it in a way that made sense to either of us." Elena was quiet for a moment. She had a way of going quiet that didn't feel like withdrawal, more like she was actually processing what he'd said instead of waiting for her turn to speak. "What does she want to be?" she asked. A marine biologist. Specifically, she wants to study octopuses. She told me last month that octopuses are smarter than most adults she knows. Also not wrong. I'm starting to think my 7-year-old has a better read on the world than I do. Their main courses arrived. The restaurant had filled around them. The couple near the back was leaving now, the man helping the woman into her coat with the careful attention of decades of habit. Nathan watched them for a second without meaning to. "You miss it," Elena said. He looked back at her. "What? That?" She nodded subtly toward the couple. "Having someone." He almost deflected. He had a dozen deflections ready, polished, practiced, the kind that redirected conversations away from anything that got too close. But she'd said she wanted honesty, and she'd been honest with him, and something about the directness of her gaze made the deflections feel like too much effort. "Yeah," he said, "sometimes. I'm sorry about your wife. Sarah told me. I didn't want to bring it up, but I also didn't want to pretend I didn't know. Rachel." He said her name deliberately because he'd learned that saying it was the only way to stop it from becoming a wound that only opened in private. "She died 3 years ago, cardiac arrhythmia. She was 29. She was perfectly healthy, and then she wasn't." Elena didn't say she was sorry again. She didn't say everything happens for a reason or that Rachel was in a better place or any of the things people said when they didn't know what else to do. She just looked at him and said, "That must have broken something in you." "It did," he said. "It broke a lot of things." "Are any of them healing?" "Some of them." He looked down at his plate. "Slowly." She nodded. That was all, and somehow that was the right response. They were halfway through dessert. Elena had ordered the tart. Nathan had ordered nothing and then eaten half of hers when she pushed it toward him, when the conversation shifted in a direction he hadn't expected. They'd been talking about work. He'd asked what she did, and she'd told him without apology. She worked mornings at a nonprofit that provided literacy resources to adult learners in underserved communities, and evenings she waitressed at a restaurant in Brooklyn to cover the gap. "2 jobs," he said. "New York," she said simply, as though that explained everything. It did. "What did you want to do, originally?" She looked at him carefully. "Write. I wanted to write." "Fiction?" "Journalism, mostly, long form. The kind of stories that take 6 months to report and 3 months to write and change how people think about something they thought they already understood." "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not pain exactly, but the memory of pain, which was slightly different. "Life redirected me," she said carefully, "a few times." There was something in the way she said it, a precise kind of restraint, like she was choosing each word deliberately, that made Nathan feel he was only getting the surface of a much larger answer. "Where are you from originally?" he asked. "Ohio, small town called Mill Haven. You wouldn't know it." "I was in Ohio," he said. "I went to Harwick on a scholarship, outside Columbus." Something changed in her face. It was subtle, a slight stillness, a fractional shift in her expression, the way a person looks when they hear a word they weren't expecting. "I know Harwick," she said. "Small school, good engineering program." "Yes." She picked up her water glass and took a careful sip. "Did you like it there?" "I was too busy surviving to know if I liked it. Scholarship didn't cover everything. I worked nights at a hardware store, weekends doing landscaping." He shook his head at the memory. "I was so convinced I was going to change the world that I barely slept. I was probably insufferable." "Probably," she said softly, and the way she said it stopped him. "Not probably. Not the way you said it to a stranger making a self-deprecating joke. The way you said it when you knew." He looked at her. Really looked. Searched her face the way you searched for something you'd set down years ago and couldn't remember where. "Elena," he said slowly. "Elena Brooks." She held his gaze. Didn't help him, didn't hinder him, just waited. He stopped. Something was moving at the edges of his memory, something he couldn't quite reach. A name, a face, a feeling. The specific feeling of being 22 years old and terrified and certain, and sitting across from someone who made both of those things feel survivable. "We've met before," she said. The same words she'd said when she sat down, the same quiet, level tone. I don't. He stopped again, rubbed the back of his neck. When? She reached into the canvas tote bag under her chair. She set something on the white tablecloth between them. A photograph. Old, printed on matte paper, the colors slightly faded the way photographs faded before everything became digital and permanent. Two people in front of a building Nathan recognized after a moment as the engineering library at Harwick. A young man, thin, poorly dressed, grinning the specific grin of someone who hadn't yet learned to curate his expressions. A young woman beside him, close but not quite touching him, laughing at something. The young man was him. The young woman was her. Nathan Archer sat in Maison Laurent with a room full of people around him and felt the floor tilt. Not dramatically, not like the movies where the world spins and the music swells. Just a quiet internal lurch. The feeling of something that had been buried for a long time shifting in the dark. He picked up the photograph. His hands were steady, because he had spent years training his hands to be steady, but something in his chest was not. "Elena," he said. "Hi, Nathan," she said. Her voice was even, careful. The voice of someone who had rehearsed this moment, not for performance, but for survival. "It's been a while." He looked at her face, and then at the photograph, and then back at her face. And the thing that cracked open in his chest started slowly to return. He remembered her in fragments, the way you remembered a place you'd lived briefly and left before it was finished with you. He remembered a library table in October, the radiators clanking, the smell of old paper and coffee from the machine down the hall that charged 50 cents and tasted like regret. He'd been staring at a differential equations problem set for 3 hours, and she'd sat down across from him without asking and said, "You're doing it wrong. You're calculating the boundary conditions before you've stabilized the function. It's backwards." He'd looked up, defensive, and found a girl with a notebook full of handwritten notes and the expression of someone who had identified a problem and was offering to help fix it, not because she wanted anything, but because inefficiency bothered her. "I'm an English major," she'd added, "but I tutored high school math for 2 years, so." They'd worked until the library closed. After that, she was just there. The way certain people became fixtures in your life, not through grand gestures, but through consistent proximity and the specific kind of attention that made you feel like the things that mattered to you also mattered to someone else. He remembered she read voraciously. Everything, indiscriminately, fiction and journalism and technical papers and the backs of cereal boxes. He remembered she had a laugh that arrived before the joke was finished. He remembered she used to read his business plans, not because she understood them, but because, she said, she understood when someone believed in something, and belief had its own kind of grammar. He remembered she had believed in him before he had given her much reason to. And then the investors had come, Reyes Capital, with their term sheets and their projections and their quietly stated expectation that Nathan's world would need to shrink down to what they valued. There were conversations he'd had that he wasn't proud of, decisions made in the name of focus and momentum and the future he was building. He had been 23 years old, and suddenly the thing he'd been chasing had appeared right in front of him, and he had reached for it with both hands. He hadn't looked back. He was looking back now. "Guan, I owe you an apology," he said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "A real one. Not a polished one." "You don't have to do that tonight," Elena said. "When else?" She looked out the window. On Fifth Avenue, a cab rolled through the amber light, and for a moment her face was all shadow and gold. When she looked back at him, there was something in her expression he couldn't fully read. Not forgiveness, not anger, something more complicated than either. "I'm not here for an apology, Nathan. I came to dinner because Sarah asked me to, and because—" She paused, picked her words. "Because I needed to know that you were real. That the person I remembered was a real person, and not something I'd made up." "I was real," he said. "I know that now." She folded her hands on the table. Her fingernails weren't painted. There was a small ink stain on the side of her right index finger, the kind you got from writing with ballpoint pens for long enough. "You disappeared. You just disappeared. No call. No letter. No explanation. And I was 22 years old and I didn't know what I'd done wrong, so I spent a long time trying to figure out what it was." Nathan felt the sentence land in him like something physical. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "I know that too. Now." She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who had done the work of understanding something difficult and come out the other side. But 22-year-old me didn't know that. 22-year-old me decided that if someone could walk away from her that completely, she must have been easy to leave. "Elena, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty." She looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you because I spent 2 years in therapy unpacking it, and I've gotten to a place where it's just a thing that happened, not a thing that's happening. But I needed you to know the weight of it, because I think you didn't know back then that your silence had weight." The restaurant moved around them. Plates were cleared. Someone at the bar laughed. Nathan sat with the weight of what she'd said and did not try to push it away. "It had weight," he said finally. I didn't let myself think about it. I was good at not thinking about things that slowed me down." "I know you were. That's not an excuse." "I know that too." He looked at her. "Why did you keep the photograph?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the traffic moved. Inside, the amber light did its patient work. "Because he mattered," she said finally. "That guy in the photograph. He mattered to me, and I didn't want to pretend he hadn't existed." She looked down at the photograph still between them on the table. "It's easy to revise people into villains when they hurt you. It's easier than holding the complicated version." She glanced up. "You weren't a villain. You were just a 23-year-old with too much ambition and not enough courage." Nathan didn't argue. He didn't have the right to argue. "And now?" he said. She picked up the photograph and looked at it for a moment. At the two young people in front of the Harwick Engineering Library, the boy grinning like the world hadn't showed him its edges yet, the girl laughing at something just outside the frame. "Now," she said, "I'm 30 years old and I have a writing scholarship I'm leaving for in 3 months. And I came to a dinner I almost canceled, and I found out that the boy in this photograph grew up to be someone who eats grilled cheese with his 7-year-old daughter." She set the photograph down. "That's something." Nathan looked at it. At himself, young and unfinished and so certain. At her, beside him but not touching him, already somehow the wiser of the two. "Can I keep this?" he asked. She considered him for a long moment. "No," she said, "but you can have a copy." And despite everything, the weight, the guilt, the thing cracking open in his chest that hadn't moved in years, Nathan Archer almost smiled. They stepped outside together at 9:47. The night was cool, the kind of early autumn cool that arrived on the air before the calendar acknowledged it. Fifth Avenue was quieter now, the dinner crowds thinning into the particular nighttime version of New York that belonged to people who actually lived there. Elena's car, an Uber, he noticed, not a car service, was 3 minutes away. They stood on the sidewalk the way people stood at the ends of evenings they hadn't expected to matter. "Thank you for coming," Nathan said, more carefully this time. "Thank you for not canceling." She pulled the strap of her canvas tote up on her shoulder. "Tell Sarah she's irritatingly good at this. She'll be insufferable about it." "Probably." The corner of her mouth lifted. He wanted to say something else. He had 100 things pressing against the inside of his chest, and none of them were ready to be words yet. So he said the one true thing he could manage. "Elena, for what it's worth." He stopped, started again. He knew what he was leaving behind, that kid in the photograph. He knew, and he left anyway. And he didn't have the decency to say so. And I think about that more than you might expect. She looked at him for a long moment. In the amber light of the street lamp, she looked both like the woman she was now and like the girl she'd been, and the combination was more than he was quite ready for. "I believe you," she said. The Uber pulled up. She opened the door, looked back at him once. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Elena." She got in. The car moved into the stream of traffic and disappeared around the corner, and Nathan Archer stood on the sidewalk outside Maison Laurent with an old photograph in his jacket pocket. She'd relented before the car came and tucked a copy of it into his hand from a fold in her wallet, a small printed duplicate she'd carried there for reasons he didn't ask about, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness. Not quite yet. Something earlier than happiness. The feeling of a door locked for so long he'd forgotten it was a door, finding itself slightly ajar. He stood there for another minute. The city moved around him, indifferent and alive. Then he took out his phone, ignored the 14 emails and the Nevada zoning text, and called Sarah. She picked up on the first ring. "Well," she said. "You're insufferable, he said. A pause. And then, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who had been right about something important, "I know," Sarah said. "But you're glad you went." Nathan looked up at the New York sky. That specific urban sky, more amber than black, full of light borrowed from a million windows. "Yeah," he said quietly. He was. He didn't sleep that night. Not the restless, familiar insomnia of a man with too many problems and not enough hours. He knew that kind well, had learned to work through it, had built half his company in the quiet hours between 2 and 5 in the morning when the rest of the world was unavailable and his mind was sharpest. This was different. This was the kind of sleeplessness that came from something shifting inside you, something that had been fixed in one position for so long that the movement itself was disorienting, like a joint you'd forgotten how to use suddenly being asked to bear weight. He lay in the dark of his bedroom, a room that was large and well-appointed and had not, in 3 years, ever felt like anything other than a place to store himself between obligations, and stared at the ceiling and let the memories come. He hadn't let them come in a long time. He was good at management, and memories were just another thing to manage. You organized them, you scheduled them, you kept them in their assigned boxes and visited them on your own terms. The photograph in his jacket pocket, folded carefully the way Elena had folded it before pressing it into his hand, had apparently revoked that particular management strategy. The memories weren't waiting for permission anymore. Elena at 22 sitting cross-legged on the floor of the engineering library because all the chairs were taken, her notebook open on her knee, reading something completely unrelated to anything he needed help with, just keeping him company because she'd understood that he studied better when someone else was in the room. He had never told her that. She had figured it out on her own in the first 2 weeks and simply adjusted her schedule accordingly. Elena in November, standing outside his dormitory in the cold with 2 cups of coffee from the cart on Harwick's main quad. Because she'd known, how had she known, that he'd pulled another all-nighter and wouldn't have eaten anything before his 8 a.m. presentation to the school's entrepreneurship panel. She hadn't made it into a gesture. She'd just handed him the coffee and said, "You've got coffee on your shirt?" "No, the other side. There you go." Elena reading his first real business plan, the one he'd stayed up 3 nights writing, the one that eventually became the seed of what would become Archer Energy Solutions. And saying nothing for a long time, and then saying, "You actually believe this is possible, don't you?" Not as a challenge, as a recognition, as though she'd found something real in the middle of what could easily have been delusion, and she was naming it so he could see it too. He'd loved her. He hadn't used that word at the time because he'd been 22 and 23, and the word felt like a weight he couldn't afford to carry while he was still trying to build something from nothing. But he'd loved her. The quiet, daily, unspectacular kind that sneaks up on you while you're busy doing other things and only announces itself once it's been there long enough to rearrange the furniture. And then Marcus Reyes had called. Nathan sat up in bed, swung his legs over the side. The floor was cold under his feet, which was grounding in a way he needed. Marcus Reyes had been 38 at the time, one of the partners at Reyes Capital, and he had cold-called Nathan on a Tuesday afternoon in February. Nathan still remembered, because the heating in his dormitory was unreliable and he'd been wearing his coat indoors for a week, after seeing Nathan's presentation at an energy conference in Columbus that Nathan had attended on a borrowed bus pass. "I want to meet with you," Reyes had said without preamble. "I think you're building something real. My partners are skeptical, but I'm not." Nathan had sat very still and kept his voice level and said, "When?" The meeting had been in a glass-walled conference room in a building on Columbus's riverfront, and Nathan had worn the one good suit he owned, which he'd bought secondhand from a Goodwill 2 towns over, and had the dry cleaned at the laundromat near campus for the occasion. Reyes had 4 associates with him. Nathan had a pitch deck and 9 years of accumulated hunger. He'd gotten the term sheet 6 weeks later. What he had not told anyone, not Sarah, not his college roommate Dev, not Rachel when they'd gotten together years later, not the journalist who'd written the inevitable origin story profiles, was what had happened in the weeks between the meeting and the term sheet. The quiet reshaping. The implicit and sometimes explicit message, delivered with Reyes's particular brand of polished directness, that a serious founder in a serious company presented a certain image, that investors needed to believe in the founder's total commitment, that relationships were wonderful things, but the early stage years required a specific kind of solitude, a monk-like devotion to the work that left very little room for anything else. Reyes had never told Nathan to end things with Elena. He had simply made it very clear in a dozen small and deliberate ways what kind of founder he was willing to back and let Nathan draw his own conclusions. Nathan had drawn them. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he would call her once things settled, once the funding was secured, once the company had its footing and he had room to breathe again. He told himself this with the conviction of a man who was lying to himself with full knowledge and choosing to proceed anyway, because the alternative was a conversation he didn't know how to have. He had never called. There was no other way to frame it. He had decided, in the way that young men with too much ambition and not enough courage sometimes decided things, that the cleanest exit was no exit at all, just a gradual fade, a failure to return calls, a disappearance so complete and quiet that it could be attributed to circumstance rather than choice. He had been 23 years old and he had been wrong, and knowing you were wrong was not the same as being able to undo it. He sat on the edge of his bed in the cold for a while. Then he got up, padded down the hallway to Lily's room, opened the door quietly, and stood in the doorway looking at his daughter's sleeping shape, the small mound of her under the blue comforter, Gerald the elephant tucked under one arm, her breathing slow and even. She looked like Rachel when she slept. The same slight frown, the same particular stillness. Nathan watched her for a long moment, and the combination of love and grief that he carried everywhere, that had become so familiar it was almost structural, pressed against his ribcage the way it always did. "I'm working on it," he said quietly, to no one in particular. Maybe to Rachel. Maybe to himself. He went back to bed. He didn't sleep for another 2 hours. But at some point before the morning, something in him stopped fighting the memories and just let them be there. And that was at least a beginning. He called Sarah the next morning at 7:30, which was early enough that she answered in a voice that suggested she'd been awake for approximately 4 minutes. "I need to know how you know her," he said. A pause. The sound of movement. A cabinet. The particular percussive noise of a coffee maker starting. "Good morning to you too," Sarah said. "Sarah?" "Elena volunteers with the same literacy nonprofit I donate to. We met at their annual fundraiser about 2 years ago. We got coffee a few times. She's..." A pause. "She's a good person, Nathan. A genuinely good person. The kind that's getting harder to find. She knew me at Harwick." Silence. Then, "I know." Nathan felt something tighten in him. "You knew." She mentioned it, eventually. She wasn't going to say anything. She didn't want it to be a whole thing. But I asked her directly because I'd seen your Harwick photos and I thought... Sarah stopped. "I put 2 and 2 together. And you still set up the dinner." "Because of that, not despite it." Her voice was careful now, thoughtful. "Nathan, you've been walking around for 3 years like you're the only person who's ever lost something. And Elena, she's been doing the same thing, just differently. She doesn't know how to let people matter to her anymore because the last time she did, it cost her." A pause. "I thought maybe seeing each other would be good for both of you, even if it was uncomfortable." "It was uncomfortable." "Was it good?" He thought about Elena setting the photograph on the white tablecloth. He thought about her saying, 22-year-old me decided she must have been easy to leave. He thought about her saying, "He mattered to me and I didn't want to pretend he hadn't existed." "Yeah," he said. "It was good." "Okay." Sarah's voice relaxed slightly. "Then what's the problem?" "The problem is that I walked away from her without a word when she was 22, and I've been carrying that for 10 years without admitting that's what I was carrying. And last night she sat across from me and was more honest about it than I had the right to expect. And I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything with it yet. That's not how I work." "I know. That's the problem." He could hear her drinking coffee. "Nathan, she's leaving in 3 months. She has a writing scholarship. Did she tell you? Some prestigious journalism fellowship based out of London. She earned it. She worked 2 jobs and kept writing in between, and she earned it. She's not waiting around for anything. I know. So don't make this about fixing something. If you want to see her again, see her, but let it be what it is and not a project. He was quiet for a moment. Since when are you this smart? He said. I've always been this smart, Sarah said. You just usually aren't listening. He didn't call Elena that day, or the next. He went back to work. The Nevada zoning dispute needed attention, and there was a board meeting Thursday that required preparation, and Lily had a school presentation on tide pools that she needed help finishing, which turned into an unexpectedly absorbing 2 hours at the kitchen table with construction paper and a printed photograph of a Pacific octopus that Lily had found herself and printed at school. Why does it have 3 hearts? Lily asked, tracing the diagram she'd drawn. Evolution, Nathan said. Blue blood needs more pumping. That's cool. She considered this. Daddy, do you think octopuses get lonely? He looked at her. She was frowning at the diagram with the specific concentration she brought to things that mattered to her. She had Rachel's frown and his stubbornness, and a combination of curiosity and earnestness that was entirely her own. Probably not, he said. They're mostly solitary. That sounds lonely, even if you don't know you're lonely. Nathan didn't say anything for a moment. Yeah, he said quietly. I think you might be right about that. Lily looked up at him with the unself-conscious directness of a child who hasn't yet learned to soften things. Are you lonely, Daddy? The question sat in the warm kitchen air between them. Outside, the afternoon light was doing something particular to the trees in the backyard, turning the leaves a deep, saturated gold that would only last a few more weeks. Sometimes, he said honestly. She thought about this. Then she went back to her diagram. I think you should get a friend, she said, with the casual authority of a 7-year-old who has resolved something. A real one, not a work one. How do you know the difference? She looked at him as though he'd asked how she knew the difference between breakfast and lunch. Work friends only talk about work. Real friends ask how you are and mean it. Nathan looked at his daughter for a long moment. When did you get so smart? He said. She shrugged, already absorbed in her diagram again. I've always been smart, she said. You just usually aren't listening. He sat with that for a moment. Then he laughed, a real one, short and startled, because it was the second time in 2 days he'd heard that exact sentence from 2 completely different people, and the universe, it seemed, was not being subtle. He texted Elena 4 days after the dinner. He wrote several versions first, which was not his usual method. He was a man who made decisions and enacted them without excessive deliberation, which was either one of his greatest strengths or one of his most significant failures, depending on who you asked. But he rewrote the message 3 times, deleting drafts that were too formal, too casual, too much like a man who was trying. In the end, he sent, "The copy of the photograph is on my desk. I keep looking at it without meaning to. I'm sorry that it took me 10 years to say the things I said on Saturday. I don't expect anything from that. I just wanted you to know." She didn't respond for 6 hours, which was long enough that he told himself she wasn't going to and made peace with it. Then, at 11:42 at night, his phone lit up. Thank you for saying it. It mattered more than I expected it to. And then, after a pause, the kid in that photo had good instincts about energy systems. It's a shame he was such a coward about everything else. He stared at the message for a long moment. Then he typed. He was. He'd be the first to admit it. Her response came quickly this time. Get some sleep, Nathan. You have a daughter to raise. He smiled at his phone in the dark of his office. Good night, Elena. Good night. He set the phone down and looked at the photograph on his desk. The 2 young people in front of the Harwick Engineering Library, caught in a moment 10 years ago, before the choices that had separated them. He'd framed it. A small frame, nothing ostentatious, but a frame nonetheless, because it seemed right to treat the thing with some care. He sat with it for a while. Then he closed his laptop, turned off the office light, and went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in longer than he could remember. Passa. They met for coffee the following week. Elena's suggestion, a small place in Park Slope near her apartment, Not the kind of place Nathan usually went, but the kind he immediately understood. Worn wooden tables, a chalkboard menu, the smell of roasting beans, and the sound of a playlist that didn't try too hard. The kind of place people worked in for 3 hours without being asked to leave. She was already there when he arrived, which surprised him. He'd expected to wait. "You're early," he said. "I'm always early." She wrapped both hands around a ceramic mug. "I assumed you would be too." "I am, usually." He sat down, flagged the server, ordered a black coffee. "You assumed correctly." Old habit from waiting tables. You learn to read people's time habits fast. She looked at him steadily. "How are you?" Not the professional answer, the real one. He thought about Lily's diagram, about the conversation in the kitchen, about the 2 hours he'd spent at the kitchen table with construction paper and the strangest, fullest feeling that had been sitting in his chest for days, warm and slightly precarious, like something he was afraid to name in case naming it made it fragile. "Better than last week," he said, which is not what I would have predicted. Elena nodded, accepting this without pressing it. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said at dinner, about breaking things when Rachel died." He hadn't expected that opening. He'd expected small talk, or maybe a continuation of the careful honesty they'd managed at the restaurant, but not this, not straight to the place that still had edges. "Yeah," he said carefully. "I'm not asking you to talk about her if you don't want to." Elena set down her mug. "But I'm asking because I want to understand the whole picture, not just the part I knew before." He looked at her. Across the wooden table in the morning light, with coffee rings on the surface and the chalkboard menu behind her head, she looked real, thoroughly, uncomplicatedly real, not performing interest, actually interested. Rachel was... He stopped. Started again because starting over was sometimes the only way forward. "She was the person I let in after I'd decided not to let anyone in. I'd been running the company for 3 years. I was good at it. I was good at the walls. And then I met her at a conference. She was doing environmental compliance consulting. And she was the most relentlessly honest person I'd ever met. She told me in the first conversation that I had the kind of confidence that was either going to make me extraordinary or impossible. And she seemed genuinely curious which one it would be." Elena's mouth curved. "Smart woman." "Very. She didn't let me be performative. She didn't let me hide behind the company or the vision or the noise of the work. She made me present, in a way I wasn't very good at." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "When she died, it wasn't just grief. It was losing the person who made me real to myself. And without her, He shook his head. "I went back to the work, because the work was the thing I knew how to do." Elena was quiet for a moment. "And Lily?" "Lily keeps me functional. She's the reason I come home, but I've been..." He looked up. "I've been doing the right things without being really there for them. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Elena said. "It makes a lot of sense." A pause. "I spent about a year after you disappeared doing the same thing in the other direction. I functioned. I went to class. I graduated. I moved to New York. I got jobs. I did everything I was supposed to do. But I decided, somewhere in there, that if I didn't let things matter too much, they couldn't hurt me too much." "Did it work?" "About as well as you'd expect." She picked up her mug. "The literacy nonprofit. I love it. The work is real, and the people are real, and it reminds me every day that the world is bigger than my own head. But the writing I've let slide, the real writing, the kind that costs you something, I've been avoiding it." She paused. "Until the fellowship." "Tell me about the fellowship." She looked at him carefully, as though deciding how much to give. Then she seemed to make a decision and leaned forward slightly. "It's a 3-month investigative journalism program, based out of London, but we'd be reporting across 3 countries, UK, Germany, and Morocco. The focus is energy access inequality, communities without reliable power, what it costs people, what it costs development." Nathan looked at her. "Energy access inequality. I know." A small, complicated smile. "Of all the topics. Did you choose it because of the topic?" "I chose it because the journalism was excellent, and the organization has integrity." She held his gaze. "But yes, I've been following the clean energy sector for years, partly because of you, partly because it's genuinely one of the most important stories of our time." She paused. I've read everything Archer Energy Solutions has published, including the parts that don't make it into the press releases. That landed somewhere unexpected. Which parts are those? The community deployment reports, the ones where your affordable energy pilot programs didn't perform as projected. The ones where the rollout was slower than you'd planned because local infrastructure wasn't ready. She looked at him levelly. Most companies bury those. You publish them. We learn more from failures than from wins. I know. That's why I read them. She paused. That's the person I recognized in the photograph, not the billionaire, the guy who still published the failure reports. Nathan sat with that for a moment. Outside, a bus went by. A couple walked past the window with a stroller. Two students at the table near the window argued in low, animated voices about something neither of them seemed likely to convince the other of. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. Do you hate me? For what I did? Underneath the very rational and processed version of it you've given me. Do you hate me? Elena was quiet for a long moment. She looked down at her mug, then back up at him. No, she said. I did. For a while, in that specific and exhausting way you hate someone when the hate is really about missing them. But no. She shook her head slowly. I think I was angry, for years, at a version of you that was simpler than the real one. Easier to be angry at. The real version is, she gestured vaguely, more complicated. More complicated is a very diplomatic way to put it. I'm a writer. Precision matters. She almost smiled. You were a 23-year-old kid who made a coward's choice when a terrifying amount of money and power were suddenly within reach. That's not a good person doing a good thing, but it's also not a monster. It's a person. She met his eyes. The question isn't what you did then. The question is who you are now. He held her gaze. And the jury's still out, she said. But you framed the photograph. That's something. He laughed. Short, genuine, slightly raw at the edges. She smiled at that. And the morning moved around them, indifferent and ordinary, and quietly full of something that neither of them had decided yet what to call. They got coffee twice more in the following 2 weeks. Not dinner, coffee, in the same Park Slope place at 8 in the morning before she started her shift at the nonprofit, which meant Nathan rearranged 2 standing meetings and didn't mention it to his assistant, who noticed anyway and said nothing, because Marcus, who had been his executive assistant for 5 years and knew him better than most people Nathan paid a lot of money to understand him, had a policy of keeping his observations to himself until asked. The conversations were not always comfortable. Nathan was beginning to understand the point. She asked him once how he made decisions, not business decisions, but the private ones. He told her that he usually had a clear answer before he'd consciously acknowledged the question, and that most of his deliberation was post hoc justification of something he'd already decided in his gut. She said that explained a lot. He asked what it explained. She said it explained how a person could walk away from someone they cared about without ever sitting down and actually choosing to do it. He didn't say anything for a moment, then, "That's very accurate." "I know." Not triumphant, just clear. She told him about the year after he disappeared, not in the way she'd told it at dinner, carefully, measured, but in more detail because they'd moved past the point where careful measurements were the most honest option. She'd lost her scholarship the following semester. She'd had to take a leave of absence and go home to Ohio for 6 months, working 2 jobs to pay back the tuition she'd lost. She didn't say explicitly that his disappearance had been the cause. She was careful about causality, about not letting the story become simpler than it was, but she said that it had been the crack that let everything else in. "I'm not telling you it's your fault," she said. "I had things in my life that were fragile before you. But you were the thing I was leaning on when I didn't know I needed something to lean on, and when you weren't there anymore, I fell down. And you got back up," he said. Eventually, slowly. She looked at her hands. "I'm stubborn. It's my best and worst quality." "I remember," he said. She looked up at him. And there it was, that brief, unguarded moment where something moved behind her eyes that was older than the careful, processed version of herself she mostly showed the world. Something that remembered, something that had not, despite everything, entirely forgotten what it had felt like to be 22 years old and sitting cross-legged on the floor of the engineering library, keeping company with a boy who thought he was going to change the world. He wanted to reach across the table. He didn't. It wasn't the right time, and he was learning, slowly, with effort, that recognizing the right time was as important as doing the right thing. "Elena," he said. "Don't," she said quietly. "I wasn't going to say anything that needs a don't." She looked at him. "Then what were you going to say?" He thought about it honestly. "That I'm glad you're stubborn, that the world would be worse without that quality in you, and that I know I don't have the right to say that, but I wanted to say it anyway." She held his gaze for a moment. Outside, the street was doing its regular Tuesday morning things. A delivery driver double-parked, music briefly escaping from the open van window before the door closed again. A woman walked by with 3 dogs who all wanted to go in different directions. "Thank you," Elena said finally. And it was small. 2 words, nothing extravagant, but she meant it without reservation, and he could tell, and that was enough for right now. The last time they met for coffee before things shifted, she told him about what his silence had cost her in ways she hadn't told him before. They were 20 minutes into their usual conversation when she said, quietly, with the specific care of someone choosing to say a difficult thing because it needs saying rather than because it will feel good to say it, "I didn't trust my own judgment for a long time after, about people, about what was real." She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the window, at the ordinary street outside. "Because I'd been so sure about you, and I was a careful person. I didn't give trust easily. When I gave it, and it turned out to be wrong, my conclusion wasn't that you'd made a mistake. My conclusion was that I was bad at reading people." "You weren't," Nathan said. "I know that now, but it took years, and it's the kind of knowing that lives in your head but not always in your body." She looked at him then, directly and without apology. "I'm telling you this not to punish you. I'm past punishing you. I'm telling you because you asked me a few weeks ago what you owed me, and I said you didn't owe me anything. That's still true, but I think you deserve to know the full weight of it, not just the managed version." He sat with that. The full weight of it. He'd carried something for 10 years, but he'd been carrying his version of it, the one his guilt had constructed, which was bad enough. This was her version. The actual architecture of what his choice had cost her, built out of real materials, load-bearing walls and all. "I hear you," he said, because he did. Because it was the right thing to say, and also because it was true, and sometimes those things coincided. "Good." She picked up her coffee. "That's all I needed." They sat together for a while after that, not talking, which had become one of the things Nathan noticed about their time together. She didn't fill silence for the sake of filling it. She let it be, which was a quality he'd encountered in very few people and valued in all of them. When she stood to leave, she gathered her coat and her canvas tote with the efficient movements he'd come to recognize as distinctly hers, and she said, almost as an afterthought, but not quite, because Elena Brooks didn't do things by accident, "I'm leaving for London in 10 weeks, but I'll be here until then." She looked at him steadily. "If you want to keep doing this, I'm willing, but I need you to know that I'm not waiting for a particular ending. I'm just here." "That's enough," Nathan said. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said. "I'm not promising anything. I'm saying it's enough for right now, being here." She studied him for a moment. He couldn't always read her. She'd built herself into someone who controlled what she let show, and he respected that and also found it quietly maddening. But he thought, in that moment, that she was deciding something, or revising something she'd already decided. "Okay," she said. She left. He sat at the table a while longer, turning his coffee cup in his hands, watching the street through the window. A kid on a bike went past, standing on the pedals, going fast. A pair of elderly men sat on a bench across the way, talking with the particular ease of people who had been having the same conversation, with variations, for decades. Nathan thought about what she'd said. About trust living in your head but not always in your body. About how the longest distance in a person wasn't between 2 cities or 2 decades, but between knowing something and feeling it in the place where it actually mattered. He had 10 years of catching up to do. Not with her. He wasn't naive enough to think that was how it worked, but with himself. with the version of himself that had been left behind in the Harwick Engineering Library, the one who had believed that people mattered more than outcomes, and who had proved himself wrong in the worst possible way, and who still somehow needed to be reckoned with. He paid for the coffee, left a generous tip because he'd learned that from Elena, who tipped more than she should have for someone working 2 jobs, and had explained it simply. They're doing work that matters and getting paid like it doesn't. He walked out into the late October morning. The air had finally committed to cold. The trees along the park slope street were turning, the colors still vivid, still fighting it. He had 10 weeks. He had a photograph on his desk. He had a daughter who told him to get a real friend, and a sister who was irritatingly right about things, and a company that needed him, and a self that needed something harder to quantify and considerably more difficult to build. He put his hands in his pockets and started walking toward the subway, and for the first time in a long time, he was not entirely sure what came next, and the uncertainty felt not like danger, like space, like the beginning of room enough to become something other than what he'd been. The invitation came on a Wednesday, delivered not through his assistant or by email but by text, which had become their way. Direct, without ceremony, the way 2 people communicated when they'd agreed to stop performing things at each other. I'm free this Saturday. You mentioned a farmhouse once. Was that real, or was that something people like you say? Nathan read it standing in the elevator of his office building, 42 floors above Midtown Manhattan, on his way up to a meeting about quarterly projections that would take 2 hours and accomplish approximately 40 minutes worth of actual decisions. He typed back before the elevator reached his floor. It's real. Upstate, about 2 hours out. It's not impressive. Fair warning. Her response came while he was still looking at the phone. Good. Impressive would ruin it. He stood in the elevator for a moment after the doors opened, which was not something Nathan Archer typically did. He moved through spaces with purpose, and standing still in an open elevator doorway was the kind of thing that made his COO nervous. But he stood there for a moment, reading the message again, before stepping out into the corridor and walking toward the conference room where 12 people were waiting for him with PowerPoint slides and bottled water. He thought, for the first time in years, that Saturday felt like something to look forward to. He almost didn't invite Lily. Not because he didn't want her there, but because he was uncertain what he was doing, and uncertain was not a condition he managed gracefully, and bringing his daughter into an uncertain situation felt like using her as ballast in a way he wasn't entirely comfortable with. It was Lily who resolved it. Friday evening, while he was packing a bag for the farmhouse, sensible things, jeans, boots, a jacket that had actual use rather than signal, she appeared in the doorway of his bedroom with Gerald tucked under her arm and the expression of someone who has assessed a situation and reached a conclusion. Are we going to the farmhouse? She asked. He hadn't mentioned it. How did you know? You packed the good coffee, she said, pointing at the kitchen bag on the floor, which did indeed contain the good coffee, the kind he only brought upstate. And you're wearing your thinking face. I have a thinking face? It's the one where you look like Gerald. She held up the elephant, whose expression, if pressed, could be described as earnest and slightly worried. Are we going? I'm going. I was going to ask Grandma to take you for the weekend. Lily considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Who else is going? He paused. A friend. She studied him. He had the distinct sensation of being assessed by someone significantly shorter and arguably more perceptive than most of his board members. The friend from dinner, she said. Aunt Sarah's friend? He looked at his daughter. Sarah told you? She didn't tell me. She said you had dinner with a nice lady and that it was good for you. Lily tilted her head. Is she nice? Yes, Nathan said. She is. Then I want to come. Said with the simple finality of a 7-year-old who has no concept of why this might be complicated. I like meeting people who are nice to you. He sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at his daughter. She looked back at him, patient, waiting, already knowing she'd won because she understood, in the way children sometimes understood things with brutal accuracy, that he was lonely, and that she was not enough to fix it, and that she wanted him fixed anyway because she loved him. I'll call Elena and ask, he said. Okay. She turned to leave, then stopped. Daddy? Yeah. Gerald thinks it's a good idea, just so you know. She disappeared down the hallway, and Nathan sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, and then he picked up his phone and called Elena. Not texted, called, because some conversations needed a voice, and said, "My daughter would like to come. She's 7, and she has opinions about everything, and she will ask you a lot of questions about marine biology. You can absolutely say no." A pause. He could hear street noise on Elena's end, the particular ambient sound of Brooklyn on a Friday evening. "Does she like pancakes?" Elena said. "She would eat only pancakes if I let her." "Then tell her I'm in," Elena said. "I make good ones." He drove them up Saturday morning, leaving the city at 7 to beat the traffic, Lily in the back seat with Gerald and a library book about cephalopods that she'd checked out specifically for the trip, because, as she'd explained at breakfast, if Elena was a writer, she probably liked people who knew things. Nathan had not corrected the logic. The farmhouse had been Rachel's idea. They'd bought it 6 years ago, before Lily was born, when the company was starting to grow faster than either of them had expected, and Rachel had said with her particular quiet insistence that they needed somewhere that was not about any of that. It was an old property, 140 years of structure, fieldstone foundation, wide plank pine floors that creaked in a way that sounded like the house was settling into the conversation, 12 acres of mixed field and woods that abutted a state forest and had no neighbors visible from any window. Nathan had not done much to it after Rachel died. He'd kept it maintained, but he was not the type to let things fall apart. That would have required a passive quality he didn't possess. But he hadn't changed anything either. Her reading chair was still in the corner of the living room. Her rain boots were still by the back door. It was not, he knew, entirely healthy, but he hadn't known what to do with it, and not knowing what to do with things was not a condition Nathan managed gracefully. Elena was standing at the end of the gravel drive when they pulled in, which meant she'd arrived before them, which meant she'd driven up herself rather than letting him pick her up, which meant she'd wanted her own car, her own exit. He understood that and respected it. She had a canvas bag over one shoulder and was wearing jeans and a dark blue sweater and looking at the tree line with an expression he couldn't read from the car. When she heard the tires on the gravel, she turned, and there was a moment, brief, unperformed, where something crossed her face that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. Lily was out of the car before Nathan had fully stopped it. "You're Elena," Lily said, with the directness of someone who saw no reason to build up to things. Elena looked down at her. "I am. You're Lily. And this is Gerald." Lily held up the elephant. "He was gray, but we wash him too much." Elena reached out and shook Gerald's paw with full seriousness. "Nice to meet you, Gerald." Lily looked at Nathan with the expression of someone whose hypothesis has been confirmed. "I like her," she said, as though Elena were not standing 3 feet away. "I can hear you," Elena said. "I know," Lily said. "That's how you know I mean it." Elena laughed. The short, surprised laugh. The real one. The same one Nathan had been trying to earn at the restaurant 6 weeks ago. He watched it happen from 2 feet away and felt something warm and slightly dangerous move through his chest. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you around." Gannett. The farmhouse in late October was not picturesque in the way photographs made farmhouses look. The kind of staged, golden hour softness that made places into symbols. It was real in the way old things were real. The porch had a board that needed replacing. There was a smear of mud along the bottom of the front door from the last rainstorm. The kitchen window didn't quite shut all the way and let in a draft that required either a specific technique with the latch or a rolled dish towel in the gap, both of which Nathan demonstrated to Elena with the matter-of-fact air of someone used to the building's particular demands. "It's wonderful," Elena said, looking around the kitchen with the expression of someone who meant it. "It's falling apart in very specific ways. That's what makes it wonderful." She ran her hand along the kitchen counter, the old butcher block that had absorbed a decade of use. "Some things are better for having been lived in." He looked at her. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the counter, at the wood, at the particular wear of it. But the sentence sat in the kitchen air between them, and he heard all the things it wasn't quite saying. Lily had already disappeared into the living room, where she'd located the shelf of board games Nathan kept there and was auditing them with the focused intensity of someone selecting the right tool for a job. "She's extraordinary," Elena said quietly. "She is." He started the coffee. "She decided she liked you before you got out of the car." "I know. She told me." A small pause. "She has Rachel's eyes." He went still for a half-second. "You can see that from a photograph." "I noticed it in the one on your mantel." She turned to look at him, direct and unapologetic. "I wasn't prying. It's just visible." "No, I know." He let out a slow breath. "She does. She has her eyes and my stubbornness and some third thing that's entirely her own that neither of us made." "Children do that," Elena said. "Become their own people before you finish planning who they'll be." He looked at her. "Do you want kids?" "You don't have to answer that." "I want to want them," she said after a moment. "I've spent so long being careful, keeping things small enough to manage, that I'm not always sure what I actually want versus what feels safe to want." She held his gaze. "That's an honest answer. It's not a pretty one." "I don't need pretty answers." "I know." She paused. "That's why I gave you that one." The coffee maker beeped. Lily called from the living room that she'd found a game called Clue and that she needed 2 more people immediately and that Gerald had agreed to play, but he didn't have thumbs so he couldn't hold the cards. Elena raised her eyebrows at Nathan. "She'll explain the rules," he said. "She has opinions about the rules." "Of course she does." Elena picked up 2 mugs and looked at him. "Cream?" "Black." "Good." She poured without another word and headed toward the living room, where Lily was arranging pieces on the board with the serious efficiency of someone who had been waiting for this game her entire life. And Nathan stood in the kitchen for one more moment, alone, with the sound of the draft through the window gap and the smell of coffee and the specific, precarious fullness of a morning that was turning into something he hadn't planned. They played Clue for an hour and a half. Elena was methodical about it, kept careful notes in a small notebook she produced from her canvas bag, which made Lily immediately declare her a genius. Nathan was competitive in the way he was competitive about everything, which meant he was trying to win while pretending he wasn't. Elena caught him twice redirecting Lily's questions to mislead her, and called him out both times without mercy. "You're doing it again," she said. "I don't know what you're referring to. You made that face, but the one that means you already know something and you're managing what information comes out of you." Lily looked at her father with wide eyes. "You have that face?" "I've known him for about 6 weeks," Elena said, "and I've already cataloged 3 faces. You live with him? You probably know 12. "I know the thinking face," Lily said, "and the board meeting face, and the sad face he thinks I don't know about." The room went quiet for a half-second. Nathan looked at his daughter. Lily was looking at the game board, moving her piece with focused attention, and he couldn't tell if she'd meant to say that last part or if it had just come out the way things did with children, honest and unpremeditated and perfectly aimed. Elena looked at Nathan. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "I have a sad face?" he said to Lily. Lily looked up at him with the patience of someone explaining something obvious. "Daddy, sometimes when you think I'm asleep and you're just sitting somewhere, your face goes all quiet and empty, like you're somewhere else." She went back to her piece. "I know it's because you miss Mom. It's okay. I have it too sometimes." The room held very still. Outside, wind moved through the trees. The house creaked in its old way, settling. Nathan looked at his daughter and felt something crack open in him that was different from the thing that had cracked open at the restaurant 6 weeks ago. That had been the crack of memory returning. This was something else, the crack of recognition, of being seen somewhere he'd thought he was invisible, by someone 7 years old who had apparently been carrying the same weight and had never once asked him to carry less of it so she could carry more. "Come here," he said, his voice not quite steady. Lily came around the board and climbed into his lap without ceremony, folding herself against him the way she'd done since she was small, with the complete physical trust of a child who knew she was safe. He put his arms around her and she said nothing, just held Gerald against her chest and looked at the game board. Nathan looked up. Elena was watching them both. Her expression was the complicated kind, the kind that held several things at once, warmth and something older, something that moved beneath the warmth like current below still water. She looked like someone in the presence of something real that she hadn't expected. She looked like someone being careful not to want too much. He understood that. He was learning it himself. "Your turn," Lily said eventually from the circle of his arms, pointing at Elena. Elena looked down at the board. "Right." She picked up her cards. "I think it was Colonel Mustard." "In what room?" Lily demanded. "The library." "With what?" Elena looked at Nathan over the top of Lily's head, and the look said several things, and none of them were about the board game. "With the candlestick," she said, obviously. Lunch was the meal Elena had promised, pancakes at 11:30, because Lily had made the timing argument that pancakes after 11 were actually brunch, and therefore still appropriate. Elena made them from scratch, which required a brief but thorough inventory of Nathan's farmhouse kitchen, conducted while Lily sat on the counter and provided commentary. "He has real maple syrup," Lily reported, checking the cabinet. "Not the fake kind. And blueberries." "Dad, why do you have blueberries?" "I stocked the house yesterday." "He drove up yesterday to stock the house," Lily said to Elena, with the informational tone of a news anchor. "He never does that." "Good to know," Elena said, cracking eggs. "He also bought the good coffee. He never brings the good coffee unless it's important." "Lily," Nathan said. "I'm being helpful," Lily said. "You're being a reporter." "Same thing." Elena laughed. She was at the stove and she was laughing, and the kitchen smelled like butter and coffee and the particular warmth of a house being used the way houses needed to be used. And Lily was swinging her legs against the cabinet with her usual percussive rhythm, and Nathan was leaning against the counter trying to look like someone who did this all the time, when in fact he was watching Elena's hands as she worked and cataloging the exact way she moved in a space, efficiently, confidently, without performance, and finding that he couldn't look away. The pancakes were good. More than good. They were the kind of pancakes that required no apology, no caveat, no comparison to a better version from somewhere else. Lily ate 3 and then half of another and then declared Gerald full, and therefore also unable to eat more, which Nathan recognized as her exit strategy from the table when she wanted to go do something else without being asked to sit still longer. "Can I go look at the woods?" Lily asked. "Stay where I can see you from the porch," Nathan said. She was out the back door before he'd finished the sentence. The kitchen was quiet then, in the way kitchens were quiet after a child left them. Suddenly much more space, much more sound of just 2 adults and the things they weren't saying. Elena poured more coffee. She sat back down across from him at the kitchen table and wrapped her hands around the mug and looked out the window at Lily, who was already crouched over something at the tree line, her coat bright against the brown and amber of late October. "Thank you for inviting her," Elena said. "She invited herself." "I know, I meant for not uninviting her." A pause. "Some men would have. Kept things adult, kept things separate. You didn't." "She's not separate from anything," he said. "She's the main thing." Elena looked at him steadily. "That's what's different about you," she said. "From before." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The Nathan I knew at 23. He was the main thing. In his own mind. Everything else orbited him. His plan, his vision, his future." She wasn't saying it harshly. It was observation, not indictment. "Now she's the center. You orbit her." He thought about that. "Is that good or bad?" "It's good," Elena said. "It's good when people get demoted from the center of their own story by the right person." She looked back out the window at Lily. "She's the right person." They sat in the quiet for a while. Outside, Lily had found something, a stick maybe, or a stone, and was examining it with the microscopic attention she brought to the natural world. "Tell me something true," Nathan said. Elena looked at him. "What kind of true?" "The kind you don't usually say." She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet he'd learned to let breathe. "I'm scared of going to London," she said. "I've wanted something like this fellowship for 10 years, and now that I have it, I'm terrified it will show me that I've lost whatever I had, that the years of not writing the real things will have She stopped. That I'll get there and have nothing to say. You won't, he said. You don't know that. I know that the person who sat across from me at a restaurant 6 weeks ago and was more honest than I deserved has things to say. I've read your blog posts. I found them. She looked at him. Something moved across her face. You found my blog. You're a good writer, Elena. You're a very good writer. The piece you wrote last year about the adult literacy student who learned to read at 61, he shook his head. I read it 3 times. She looked away. Out the window, the tree line, Lily at the edge of it. That one was easy, she said quietly. He gave me everything. I just had to not get in the way of it. That's not nothing. Most people can't do that. Get out of the way of the story. Most people make it about themselves. She didn't say anything. He'd landed somewhere real and they both knew it. You're going to be fine in London, he said. Better than fine. She looked at him. The light was doing its particular October thing through the kitchen window, not flattering in any deliberate way, just honest. The light of a day that wasn't trying to be anything. In it, she looked tired and real and more herself than she'd looked anywhere with ambient lighting designed for impression. Why are you being kind to me? She said. Because it's accurate, he said. I'm not being kind to make you feel better. You're a good writer. That's a fact. She studied him for a long moment. Okay, she said finally, and the word came out smaller than her usual words, smaller and more unguarded, and he held it carefully because it was the kind of small thing that broke easily if you handled it wrong. The afternoon went the way good afternoons go, without a plan, which was the only way they actually worked. Lily found a salamander under a flat stone near the tree line and brought it to Elena for identification with the careful, cupped hands transport of a child who understood living things required respect. Elena, who had done enough research to keep up, he suspected she'd looked some things up the night before, though he didn't ask, correctly identified it as a red-backed salamander, which made Lily make a sound that could only be described as reverential. It's in the lungless salamander family, Lily said. They breathe through their skin. I know, Elena said. That's pretty remarkable. Everything breathes somehow, Lily said, with the philosophical weight of someone who had recently learned a fact and was still absorbing its implications. Even things you wouldn't expect. Nathan walked with them along the edge of the field, his hands in his pockets, listening to his daughter explain the properties of amphibian respiration to a woman who asked questions that were real questions, not adult talking to child questions. The afternoon light came in at the low angle of late October, the kind that stretched shadows long and made ordinary fields look like they belonged somewhere in a painting you couldn't quite place. He walked behind them and watched and didn't try to perform anything. At some point, Lily got tired. She would never admit to being tired, but she slowed down and started carrying Gerald in both arms instead of one, which was her tell. And Nathan suggested a fire inside, which she agreed to with the relieved enthusiasm of someone rescued from a concession they hadn't planned to make. They built the fire together, which was to say Nathan built it while Lily supervised with detailed commentary and Elena sat in Rachel's reading chair with her knees drawn up and her coffee and watched with the expression of someone storing something. The chair was old, navy blue, slightly misshapen from years of someone else sitting in it in the same way. Elena sat in it differently. Her knees up, her posture curled, the opposite of how Rachel had sat. And it should have bothered Nathan more than it did. It didn't bother him. He wasn't sure what that meant, but he sat with it without forcing an interpretation. The fire took. Lily approved. She settled on the floor in front of it with Gerald and the cephalopod book and was asleep within 20 minutes, tipped slightly sideways against the base of the couch with the total physical commitment of a child who never did anything halfway. Nathan and Elena sat on opposite ends of the couch above her, with the fire and the sleeping child between them, and the farmhouse held its particular old house quiet. She fell asleep mid-page, Elena said softly. She always does. She'll be furious about it when she wakes up. She'll say she was just resting her eyes. Exactly. He looked at her. You have younger siblings? A brother, 8 years younger. A pause. We're close now. We weren't for a while. He lives in Columbus. Near Harwick. Near enough. She looked at the fire. He's the stable one. Married, 2 kids, teaches high school history. He has the life I thought I'd have when I was 18 and still believed in straight lines. Do you wish you had it? She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she thought about things. Sometimes, in the abstract. But he's happy with it because it's genuinely what he wanted, and I'd be miserable with it because it's not. She looked at her coffee. I used to think that meant I was the broken one. Now I think it just means we wanted different things. What do you want? He asked it simply, no weight on it. An honest question. She looked at him. The fire moved. Lily made a small sound in her sleep and resettled, pulling Gerald tighter. To write things that matter, Elena said. To live somewhere I can think. To have... She stopped. Started again. To have people in my life that I trust enough to be uncomfortable with. A pause. That last one took me a while to figure out. What does that mean? It means comfortable people are easy. You can be around comfortable people without risking anything. But the people who see you, the ones you can disagree with, the ones who notice when you're not okay, the ones that make you feel things you didn't plan to feel. She looked at the fire. Those are the people that mean something. They're also the ones that can hurt you, and I'd been choosing comfortable. He was quiet for a moment. Elena. I know, she said. I wasn't going to, I know what you were going to say, and I know. She looked at him. We're in complicated territory. You know that. Yes. I'm leaving in 4 weeks. I know. And I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep, and I don't want you to make me one either. She held his gaze steadily. But I want to be honest about the fact that this... She gestured at the space between them, at the fire, at the sleeping child on the floor, at the kitchen still warm with the smell of pancakes and coffee. This is the least comfortable I've been around another person in years, and I mean that as a good thing. He looked at her for a long moment. In the firelight, in the reading chair with her knees drawn up and her coffee going cold, and the tired, careful honesty on her face, she looked like someone who had spent years building walls that were good walls, necessary walls, walls that had done their job, and who was now standing at the window of one of them, looking out, not yet ready to open the door but no longer pretending the door wasn't there. I haven't felt much of anything in a long time, he said. And then I sat across from you in a restaurant 6 weeks ago, and you put a photograph on the table, and I've felt things every day since. He paused. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you the truth because you told me yours. She looked at him. Something in her face moved. Not broke, not gave way, but moved, like water below ice when the temperature shifts, the first molecular loosening before anything visible changes. You're a hard man to stay angry at, she said. Quiet, almost to herself. Good, he said. They sat in the firelight with the sleeping child between them and the wind moving through the old house's bones, and neither of them said anything else for a long time, and neither of them needed to. Dinner was simple. He'd brought soup ingredients and bread from the city, and Elena chopped vegetables with the same efficient purpose she brought to everything, while Nathan heated the broth and Lily, now awake and indeed furious about having fallen asleep, sat at the kitchen table and dictated from the cephalopod book about the hunting strategies of the mimic octopus. It can pretend to be a lionfish, Lily said, or a flounder, or a sea snake. It just becomes whatever it needs to be. Smart animal, Elena said, without looking up from the carrots. Very smart, Lily confirmed, but it can't do it forever. Eventually it has to just be itself again. Nathan looked up from the stove. Elena looked up from the cutting board. They looked at each other across the kitchen. Lily had already moved on to the next page, absorbed, unaware that she'd said anything notable. After dinner, Nathan drove Elena back into town. She'd left her car at a park and ride outside the city and taken a train up, which he hadn't known until she mentioned it over dessert, and which explained some things about her independence, and some things about how seriously she took having her own way out of situations. Lily fell asleep in the back seat within 10 minutes, which made the drive quiet in a comfortable way. At the station, Elena gathered her bag and opened the car door and stopped. Nathan? Yeah. She looked at him. The station lights were the cold blue white of fluorescent efficiency, nothing flattering about them. In them she looked tired and real and unhidden. "Today was good," she said. "It was genuinely good. I didn't know if it was going to be." "Neither did I." "Your daughter is remarkable." "She'd be pleased to hear that." "She'd say she knows." Elena almost smiled. "She absolutely would." A pause, the kind that held something. "I'll be here 4 more weeks," Elena said. "If you want—" She stopped, revised. "I'd like to see you again before I go." He looked at her steadily. "Tell me when." She nodded. Got out. She walked into the station without looking back. Not coldly, just with the purpose of someone who knew that looking back sometimes made leaving harder and who had learned to be careful about that. Nathan sat in the parking lot for a moment. In the back seat, Lily slept with Gerald against her cheek, her face perfectly peaceful, her chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a child who hadn't yet learned to carry her sleep lightly. He looked at her. He thought about what Elena had said. "She's the center, you orbit her." And he thought about how right that was, and how it had happened without his planning it, and how it was the best thing that had happened to him in years. He thought about a farmhouse full of pancake smell and firelight, and a board game, and a salamander in cupped hands, and a woman in a navy reading chair with her knees drawn up, and a sentence about being uncomfortable with someone and meaning it well. He had 4 weeks. He was not going to waste them managing things from a careful distance. He was not going to mistake restraint for wisdom. He was going to be present, genuinely, messily, imperfectly present, in the way that he'd learned this day was the only kind of presence that actually counted. He started the car. He pulled out of the lot, and he drove his sleeping daughter home through the dark, through the upstate quiet, through the trees still holding the last of their color against the inevitable. She left on a Tuesday. He knew the date 3 weeks in advance because she'd mentioned it once, casually, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely. They'd been at the Park Slope coffee place, their usual table, and she'd said, "I leave the 14th, the way you said a dentist appointment," factual and unadorned, and he'd filed it away in the part of him that tracked important things without being asked to. The 4 weeks between the farmhouse and the 14th were not the 4 weeks Nathan had told himself he would handle well. He'd meant what he said in the parking lot that night. Present, genuinely present. But presence turned out to be more complicated than intention. He'd spent so long operating at a particular altitude, above the immediate, above the personal, making decisions from the clean elevation of strategy, that dropping down into actual daily living with another person required muscles he'd let atrophy. He got it wrong sometimes. He knew that. The second week they'd walked in Prospect Park on a Sunday morning, Lily with them, running ahead on the path toward the pond while Nathan and Elena walked at the measured pace of 2 people who had things to say and were deciding how to say them. And he'd spent the first 20 minutes on his phone, not obviously, not rudely, but checking it, the habitual pull of it, the corporate nervous system that pulsed through his hand at 2-minute intervals because he had never fully trained it not to. Elena had said nothing. She'd walked beside him and talked to him as though the phone weren't there, and he'd been half present and half somewhere in Nevada, where his team was negotiating a land lease, and then Lily had turned back toward them and yelled, "Dad, look!" That's it, about something in the pond, and he'd looked up from his phone and seen Elena watching him with an expression he recognized from the dinner at Maison Laurent, evaluating, measuring, deciding something. And he'd put the phone in his pocket. "Sorry," he said. "You don't have to apologize to me," she said. "I know. I'm apologizing to myself." He looked at the pond where Lily was now crouched at the edge watching something in the water. "I just told myself I was going to be here. And then I wasn't." Elena was quiet for a moment. "It doesn't disappear overnight, the habit of being somewhere else." She said it without absolution, not forgiving the behavior, just naming it accurately. "The question is whether you notice it." "I noticed it." "Then that's something." She paused. 3 years ago, would you have noticed?" He thought about it honestly. "No?" "Then you're ahead of where you were." She looked at Lily, who was now apparently negotiating with a duck about something, gesturing with both hands. "She does that too, by the way. Disappears into her head. She's just more honest about it than you are." He looked at his daughter, then back at Elena. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Both, she said, the way most true things are. He left the phone in his pocket for the rest of the afternoon. That. 10 days before she left, Elena came to his apartment for the first time. Not for anything significant. Lily had a school project on renewable energy, which had produced the slightly surreal situation of the daughter of America's most prominent clean energy entrepreneur needing help explaining solar panels to second graders. And Elena had offered to help make the poster, because she had, as she put it, strong opinions about poster design that I've had no outlet for. The apartment was on the Upper West Side, high enough to see the park from the living room windows, large enough to feel like it had been designed to impress, and then grown into by a man who'd run out of things to impress people with and started caring about whether Lily had enough room to build octopus habitats out of cardboard. There were cardboard octopus habitats in various stages of construction along the far wall of the living room. Elena noticed them first thing. She's building a whole ecosystem, Nathan said. I can see that. Elena crouched down and examined the nearest one, carefully constructed, earnest, slightly structurally improbable. She used actual seaweed? We got it at the fish market. She insisted on accuracy. Elena stood up and she was smiling, and the smile was the unperformed kind, the kind that happened when people forgot to curate themselves. She's going to be extraordinary, she said. She already is. Lily appeared from the hallway with the poster board and 3 different colors of marker and the expression of someone who had a plan and needed people to execute it. She assessed Elena immediately. You're good at art, she said. Moderate, Elena said honestly. I'm better at layout than illustration. Lily nodded, apparently satisfied with the precision of the answer. Daddy can't draw anything that doesn't look like a rectangle, she said. To be fair, Nathan said, most of engineering is rectangles. Solar panels are rectangles, Lily said. So that's okay. You can do those. She handed him the blue marker. Elena, you do the writing. Your handwriting is better. Elena looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Elena. Between them, Lily was already spreading the poster board on the coffee table with the authority of a director who had fully staffed her production. She's been like this since she could talk, Nathan said. I believe it, Elena said, and sat down on the floor. They worked for an hour and a half. It was not a graceful process. Lily changed the layout twice. There was a significant debate about whether to include wind energy or focus exclusively on solar. Nathan's rectangles were in fact quite good, and he was slightly smug about it, and Elena's handwriting was the kind that looked effortless but wasn't, the kind that came from years of notebooks and deadline pressure and the physical habit of getting words down fast and clean. At some point, Lily looked up from the poster and said, without context, "Are you two going to be friends forever?" The room went quiet in the way rooms went quiet when children said things that were more honest than the adults around them were prepared for. I hope so, Elena said, without looking at Nathan. Good, Lily said, and went back to coloring a sun that was aggressively yellow. Gerald hopes so too. He likes you. I like Gerald. Knows. Lily paused her coloring. He says you're one of the safe people. Elena's hand stopped moving for a half second. Nathan saw it, the tiny pause, the fractional stillness, and saw something cross her face that she didn't quite get under control in time, something that looked like it mattered more than she'd expected it to. Tell Gerald thank you, she said quietly. He can hear you, Lily said. Thank you, Gerald, Elena said, to the stuffed elephant propped against the couch, and meant it more than the sentence required. Nathan looked at the poster board, at the careful rectangles he'd drawn, at his daughter's aggressive son, at Elena's clean handwriting spelling out the science in words a 7-year-old's class would understand. He thought about what Sarah had said weeks ago. You've been walking through your own life like a ghost. And he thought that this was the opposite of that. This was the specific gravity of being in the room, in the moment, with the people in front of him, with nowhere else to be and no altitude to retreat to. He was not going to take it for granted. She came to dinner 3 nights later, the last week before the 14th. Just the 3 of them, at his apartment, which Nathan cooked for, badly, in the specific way of a man who could follow a recipe with precision but had no improvisational instinct in a kitchen. Elena stood at the counter and watched him overcorrect the pasta water seasoning twice before saying, "Give me the salt," in a tone that brooked no argument, and taking over, while Lily sat at the kitchen island and documented the entire process in a drawing she said was "for the record." "What record?" Nathan asked. "History," Lily said with great seriousness. They ate at the kitchen table rather than the dining room, which seated 12, and was where Nathan had client dinners and felt approximately like eating in a conference room. The kitchen table was old, bought secondhand because Rachel had wanted something with history in it, scarred and warm and the right size for people who were actually there. The conversation moved the way good conversations moved, not in a line, but in a current, carrying things along that you hadn't planned to say. They talked about Lily's presentation, which she'd given that day, and described as extremely successful. They were very impressed by the rectangles. They talked about Elena's packing, which she said was going badly because she kept adding books and then taking them out and then adding different ones. Nathan said she should just bring whatever she wanted. She could ship things if the bag was too heavy, and Elena said she wasn't going to ship things across the Atlantic like a person with excessive resources. "You could borrow my resources," he said. "That's a generous offer. It's a practical one." "They're not the same thing." She said it lightly, but she meant it, and he knew she meant it, and he didn't push. After dinner, Lily announced she was tired and went to bed with a promptness that Nathan recognized as intentional. She'd been doing this lately, engineering exits at moments that seemed to suggest the adults needed the room. He wasn't sure whether to find it touching or alarming. He and Elena sat at the kitchen table with the dishes still between them and the city doing its nighttime thing beyond the windows. The amber glow, the particular urban version of quiet that was not quiet but had its own rhythm. And Elena held her wine glass and looked at him with the expression of someone who has been building up to something. "I want to say something before I go," she said. "And I want to say it here, not at an airport or in a text message." He was still. "Okay. I came to that dinner 6 weeks ago, almost 7 now, expecting to sit across from a stranger and do Sarah a favor and go home." She looked at the table, then back at him. "I did not expect to find the person I remembered still in there. I expected the money to have replaced him, or the grief, or just time." She paused. "I was wrong." "Elena, let me finish." Not sharp, just clear. "I spent 10 years deciding that what I'd given you at 22 was a mistake. Not you specifically. The giving. The way I'd just handed you trust without asking for anything in return, and then stood there empty-handed when you were gone." She set down the wine glass. "And then I sat across from you at a restaurant, and you looked at a photograph, and I watched something crack open in your face that you weren't performing, that you couldn't have performed, and I thought, oh, he was real. The thing I remembered was real." He didn't say anything. He was listening with his whole body, the way you listen to something you couldn't afford to miss. I'm not saying this to tell you I've forgiven everything, or that it doesn't still have edges." She looked at him steadily. "I'm saying it because I'm getting on a plane in 5 days, and I don't want to leave with you not knowing that this—" She gestured at the space between them, at the kitchen, at the evidence of the evening all around them. This mattered, past tense and present tense both. He sat with that for a long moment. "Thank you," he said, "for saying it. Don't thank me, just—" She paused. "Just do something with it." "What do you mean?" She looked at him carefully. "I mean that I've watched you for 7 weeks be a different person than the one you've been living as. More present, more honest, less hidden behind the company and the schedule and the controlled image." She paused. "And I want you to keep doing that when I'm gone. Not because of me, because Lily deserves the version of you that showed up this fall. And because you deserve it too." He felt the sentence land in him the way she'd clearly meant it. Not as a compliment, not as a condition, but as a challenge. The kind that came from someone who had watched carefully and was naming what they saw without softening it. "I hear you," he said. "I mean it, Nathan. Not the polite version of hearing me. The actual version." "I know." He held her gaze. "I hear you." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then something in her face shifted slightly. the careful measurement dropping into something more unguarded. "Ask me something," she said. "Something real." He thought about it. There were 100 things he could ask, 100 threads he could pull. He chose the one that mattered most. "Do you want to come back?" he said. "After the 3 months? Is that something you want?" She was quiet for a long time. The city moved beyond the windows. Somewhere in the apartment, he could hear the faint sound of Lily's white noise machine, the one she'd slept with since she was 2. "I want to," Elena said finally, which is not the same thing, but it's closer than I've been to wanting anything in a long time. She looked at her hands. 3 months is a long time. Things change. People change. I've learned not to bet on futures I can't see. That's fair. But she looked up at him. "Ask me again when I'm back." "I will," he said. "That's a promise I can keep." She held his gaze, and for a moment, brief, unguarded, more honest than either of them had planned for, she looked like the girl in the photograph. Not younger, not less formed, just the same. The same essential person, the one who had sat cross-legged on a library floor and kept someone company because she understood he needed it, and she could provide it, and why wouldn't she? "Take care of her," Elena said softly. Meaning Lily. Meaning also, Nathan thought, something wider. "Always," he said. But she left on a Tuesday, as planned. He didn't go to the airport. She hadn't asked him to, and asking her if she wanted him to had felt like the wrong pressure, so he hadn't asked. Instead, he texted her at 7 in the morning before her car arrived. Safe flight. Write things that matter. She responded 40 minutes later, which meant she was already in the car. Take care of the people in front of you, both of them. He read it standing in the kitchen, making Lily's breakfast, the early morning gray outside the windows doing its slow graduation toward the pallid gold of an autumn morning in New York. He put the phone in his pocket and finished the eggs. Lily came in at 7:30, still in pajamas, hair erect, Gerald under one arm. "Did Elena leave today?" she asked. "This morning. Early." Lily sat down at the kitchen table. She looked at her plate. "Will she come back?" He thought about the question carefully, the way it deserved. "I think so," he said. "I hope so." Lily looked at him with those Rachel eyes. "Do you like her, Daddy? Like, actually like her?" He set a glass of orange juice in front of his daughter and looked at her honest, waiting face. "Yes," he said, "I do." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied with the answer. She picked up her fork. "Good," she said. "Gerald does too." "I know," Nathan said. She told him thank you. Lily smiled at that. A real smile, the gap-toothed one, and started eating. Nathan sat across from her with his coffee and watched the morning come in through the kitchen windows and held himself in the present, in the kitchen, with his daughter and the sound of the city waking up, and did not go somewhere else. The first week without Elena in it was strange in a way he hadn't predicted. Not painful, not the grinding absence of grief. He knew what that felt like, had lived in it for years, knew its specific weight and texture. This was different. Lighter, but persistent. The way a room felt when furniture had been rearranged. Everything where it was supposed to be. Nothing to put your finger on, and yet the space organized itself differently than you were used to. He noticed it in small ways. He'd reach for his phone during Lily's breakfast and then put it back down, which was new. He'd find himself in a board meeting listening to a procurement argument and thinking about what it would look like if the decision also accounted for the communities at the receiving end of the infrastructure, which was not new but had a different urgency than it used to. He'd drive home in the evenings and actually go home, not stop at the office for another 2 hours, not take calls in the car that stretched his arrival past Lily's bedtime. Just drive home and be there. Lily noticed before she said anything. She was like that. She absorbed things for a while before she named them. It was the 3rd week of Elena's absence when Lily said, while they were doing dishes together after dinner, she washed, he dried. It was their system, inefficient and functional. "You're different." "Different how?" She thought about it with the seriousness she gave to things she'd been thinking about for a while. "You're more here," she said. Before, sometimes you were here, but you were also somewhere else at the same time. Like your body was in the room, but your brain was at work. She handed him a wet plate. Now your brain is also here. He dried the plate. Is that better? She looked at him as though the question were slightly ridiculous. Yes, Daddy, obviously. He put the plate in the cabinet. I'm working on it, he said. I know, she said. I can tell. They did the rest of the dishes in comfortable silence. Outside, November had arrived with its particular commitment to gray, the last leaves going, the city pulling into itself for the season. Nathan dried plates and listened to his daughter hum something tuneless, and thought about what Elena had said. Lily deserves the version of you that showed up this fall, and thought that she'd been right, and that being right about someone was a form of generosity he was still learning to receive. Mas. He called his COO, James Whitfield, in the 4th week of Elena's absence. James had been with him for 6 years, steady, meticulous, the kind of executive who made things function without needing credit for it, which was the rarest and most valuable quality Nathan knew how to identify in a person. I want to restructure how I spend my time, Nathan said. A pause. James was a man who processed before he responded, which was one of the things Nathan valued about him. Okay, he said carefully. What does that mean? It means I want to step back from daily operational decisions. Not from the company, not from strategy, not from the things that actually need me, but the daily management layer, Basam, the procurement approvals, the vendor negotiations, the internal conflict resolution. I want that to sit with you and the senior team. Another pause. That's a significant change. I know. Can you handle it? Of course I can handle it. I've been handling half of it anyway. James paused. What's this about, Nathan? Is everything okay? Nathan looked at the window, the gray November sky, the park below, the usual orchestrated movement of people and dogs and strollers doing their daily business. Everything's fine, he said. I'm trying to do what I should have done 2 years ago. Be a father first and a CEO second, instead of the other way around. A pause. And I'm trying to be the kind of CEO who builds things that last, instead of the kind who makes himself indispensable. James was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had something in it that wasn't quite emotion, but was in the neighborhood. I think that's the right call, he said. I know. I should have made it earlier. You're making it now. Yeah. Nathan turned from the window. I also want to revisit the community deployment program, the affordable energy initiative we've been running in 3 markets. I want to scale it, not as a PR project, as the actual work. That's going to require real capital allocation. I know. Let's find it. James made a sound that was either agreement or the suppression of a satisfied smile. Nathan suspected both. I'll set up the planning meetings, James said. Make them shorter than they need to be, Nathan said, and leave the Fridays alone. Done, James said. And then, for what it's worth, whatever is happening with you, it looks good from the outside. Nathan thought about Lily handing him a wet plate and saying your brain is also here with the matter-of-fact relief of someone whose patience had finally been rewarded. It's a work in progress, he said. Aren't we all? James said, and hung up. Elena texted sporadically. Not every day. She was working, and working hard by the sound of it, filing dispatches from a mining community in northern England where access to reliable power was costing people things that were invisible from a comfortable distance. She sent him a link to her first published piece, no preamble, just the link and a period. He read it 3 times. It was the best thing she'd written, by a significant distance, sharper than the blog posts, more certain, the prose stripped to what it needed and nothing else. She'd interviewed a 64-year-old woman whose medical equipment ran on a generator because the grid connection was unstable, and she'd written the woman's story without a single moment of condescension or performed sympathy, just the specific weight of a life lived against an infrastructure that had never been built with it in mind. He texted back, "This is the real thing, Elena. This is the writing you were afraid you'd lost. You hadn't lost it. You just needed the room." She didn't respond for 2 days. Then, "Don't make me cry in a London newsroom." And then, after a pause, "Thank you. I mean it." And then another pause, longer. "How's Lily?" He took a photograph of Lily's latest octopus habitat. She'd added a small figure she'd made from clay that she called the scientist, and sent it with the message, "Building ecosystems, asking about you." Elena's response, "Tell her Gerald would be impressed." He showed Lily the text at breakfast. Lily read it and nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose opinion has been validated by an authority. "I told you she was one of the safe people," Lily said. "You did," Nathan agreed. "Gerald is usually right about that." "I'm starting to believe it." Lily looked up at him with the particular look she had when she was about to say something she'd been turning over for a while. "Daddy, when Elena comes back, are we going to keep being her people?" He set down his coffee, looked at his daughter across the kitchen table, at the honest, waiting face that held Rachel's eyes, and his stubbornness, and that particular third thing that was entirely its own. "I hope so," he said. "I'm going to try." Lily considered this. "Trying is good," she said finally, "but doing is better." "Where did you hear that?" She shrugged, already pulling her cereal bowl toward her. "I thought of it myself." He almost told her it sounded like something Elena would say. He stopped himself because it did, and the recognition of that fact hit him somewhere more central than he was ready to examine over breakfast. He went back to his coffee. Outside, the gray November sky was doing what it did, persisting, flat and honest, without any performance of something better than it was. He'd always found November difficult, the stripped-down quality of it, the year becoming what it actually was once the color was gone. This November felt different, still gray, still cold, still asking something of him that previous Novembers hadn't, but different in the way that things were different when you were paying attention. Not easier, just more real. And more real was, he was learning, its own form of better. He had 6 weeks left of the 3 months. 6 weeks in which he was doing not just intending, coming home on time, eating dinner at the kitchen table, sitting with Lily while she read the cephalopod book, and asked questions he couldn't always answer, having conversations with James about a company that should outlast any particular version of its founder, driving upstate some weekends with no agenda except the particular quality of a farmhouse being used, stepping back from the altitude he'd lived at for years and being on the ground, where the actual things were. It was not a dramatic transformation. It did not feel like an arrival. It felt like the slow, unglamorous work of a man correcting the course of something large. Not quickly, not with a sharp turn, but steadily, degree by degree, in the direction of the life he'd been standing next to without quite inhabiting. He was making no promises about what came next. Elena had asked him not to, and she'd been right, and he was getting better at understanding when she was right and letting that be enough. But he was also, for the first time in a long time, entirely present in the direction he was moving. And that, the clarity of it, the honest forward motion, the daily small evidence that he was becoming someone his daughter could depend on and his younger self would recognize, that was not nothing. That was, in fact, considerable. She came back on a Thursday in February, which was not a romantic month regardless of what the greeting card industry insisted, and the city was doing what New York did in February, gray, cold, aggressively indifferent to the preferences of its inhabitants, the kind of weather that didn't care what you were feeling and wouldn't adjust itself for the occasion. Nathan knew her flight landed at JFK at 2:17 in the afternoon. He knew this because he'd looked it up, not because she'd told him. She hadn't given him her arrival details, which he'd understood as intentional and had respected, because respecting Elena's need for her own exits and her own entrances was something he'd learned was not optional. It was the basic grammar of taking her seriously. He did not go to the airport. He went to work instead, which was what he did on Thursdays, and he sat through a 2-hour planning session about the expanded community energy program with James and the senior team, and he contributed meaningfully to it because the work was real and mattered, and he had not given up the work. He'd given up letting the work be the place he hid. There was a difference, and he was getting better at living inside it. At 4:43, his phone buzzed on the conference table. He'd left it face down, which was new enough behavior that James had noticed it weeks ago and said nothing, which was its own form of commentary. He glanced at it. I'm back. The city looks exactly the same. He picked up the phone, looked at the message. Around him, the meeting continued. James was talking about grid connection timelines in the southeastern markets, something Nathan would normally have an opinion about and would normally have already interrupted to share. He typed back, "The city doesn't change for anyone. How was the flight?" "Long. I watched 2 movies I don't remember and ate something that used to be a sandwich." "Are you home?" "In a cab. 30 minutes out." He set the phone down, looked at the meeting. James was looking at him with the careful non-expression of a man who had learned to read his employer without appearing to. "Everything okay?" James said. "Fine." Nathan looked at the timeline on the screen. "I want to move the southeastern rollout up by 6 weeks. The community in Caldwell County has been waiting long enough." James made a note. The meeting moved on. Nathan's phone sat face down on the table and he left it there, and he was present for the remaining 40 minutes of the session in the way he'd been practicing being present. Not perfectly, but genuinely, which was what actually counted. He texted her that evening after Lily was in bed. "How are you settling back in?" A long pause. Long enough that he'd set the phone down and was washing the last of the dinner dishes when it buzzed. "My apartment smells like someone else. 3 months of not being here and it stopped recognizing me." A pause, then, "That might be the jet lag talking." "Probably. Sleep helps." "I know. I'm not sleeping yet." Another pause. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What did you do?" "These 3 months. Actually do, not the version for public consumption." He dried his hands, sat down at the kitchen table where 6 weeks ago Lily had declared his brain was also here now, where 3 months ago Elena had eaten dinner and told him she was leaving and asked him to do something with what she'd said. He thought about how to answer honestly without making it sound like a performance of honesty, which was its own kind of dishonesty. "I came home on time. Every day. I gave James the operational layer he should have had 2 years ago. I drove upstate 4 weekends with Lily and let the farmhouse be what it was supposed to be. I launched the community energy expansion. It's real now, not a pilot. I read your pieces when they came out, all 6 of them, and I thought about the communities in them and what we hadn't built yet that they needed." He paused, then added, "I learned how to make pancakes. They're not as good as yours, but Lily says they're acceptable, which from her is high praise." The response took a while. He waited, not impatiently. "That's not the version for public consumption." "No, that's the real one." "Yes." Another pause. "The pancakes thing made me laugh. I needed that tonight. A beat." "Nathan." "Yeah, I'm glad you did those things. Not because I asked you to. Because you actually did them. There's a difference. There's a significant difference." She paused. "Get some sleep. We'll talk when I'm human again." "Good night, Elena." "Good night." He sat at the kitchen table for a while after. The apartment was quiet in the specific way it was quiet after Lily went to bed. All her energy still present in the room somehow, in the octopus habitats along the wall, in the posters she'd brought home from school and taped to the refrigerator, in the collection of stones she'd arranged on the windowsill in an order she'd described as scientifically significant and then refused to explain further. The apartment had become, over these 3 months of coming home on time and being in the rooms he was in, a place that felt like someone actually lived there. He hadn't noticed how much it hadn't felt that way before, until it started to. He thought about trust living in the head, but not always in the body. He thought about the long, unglamorous distance between knowing something and feeling it in the place that mattered. He thought about Elena landing at JFK at 2:17 into a gray February afternoon and taking a cab to an apartment that smelled like someone else's 3 months and texting him that the city looked exactly the same. He thought, it doesn't, though. Not from here. She called him 4 days later. Not a text, a call, which was notable. Because they were both text people, it was the medium they'd established, and a call meant something was different. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey. Hey." Her voice had the specific texture of someone who had slept properly for the first time in days. More grounded, more settled, present in a way jet-lagged people weren't. Sorry for calling. I know we usually don't apologize. It's fine. He was in his home office, the one he'd been using less since he'd restructured his time, which meant it had become the room where he read things rather than the room where he worked late. How are you? Strange, she said. Being back is strange. 3 months felt like a long time while I was in it, and now I'm back, and it feels like I just stepped out for a minute and came back and everything is the same, and I'm not. A pause. Does that make sense? It makes a lot of sense. I went back to the nonprofit yesterday. My desk still has the same coffee ring on it. Maria had rearranged my pencil cup and acted like she hadn't. Everything normal, except I kept wanting to tell people about the woman in Caldwell. She stopped. Not Caldwell. That's yours. The woman in County Durham, the one from the last piece. I read that piece 4 times, Nathan said. I know, you texted me after each one. Was that too much? No. A pause. It was the right amount. She was quiet for a moment. Nathan, can we meet? Not coffee. Something more than coffee. I have things I want to say that I don't want to say at a table in Park Slope. He felt something move in his chest. Not anxiety. Something quieter, more like the feeling of a question about to be answered. Where? She thought about it for a moment. The farmhouse, she said. If that's okay. I keep thinking about it. When? This weekend? If Lily will be with Sarah this weekend. She's been angling for it. A pause. Just us? A beat. Just us, Elena said. If that's okay. It's okay, he said. It's more than okay. She drove herself up Saturday morning, which he'd expected. He arrived Friday evening to open the house, turn on the heat, stock the kitchen with things that weren't performative, good bread, soup ingredients, the decent coffee, nothing that announced effort too loudly. He built a fire and let it die down to coals and rebuilt it in the morning. He did not clean the house beyond what it needed because it was a farmhouse and it had a porch board that needed replacing and a window that required a dish towel, and those were not things you fixed for an occasion. They were things you lived with, and she knew that. She arrived at 10. He heard the tires on the gravel and went to the door. She looked different from 3 months ago, not dramatically. She was wearing the same kind of clothes, jeans and a coat, the canvas tote. But something in how she carried herself was different, less careful, maybe. Like she'd put something down while she was away and hadn't picked it back up. She looked at the farmhouse, then at him. The porch board is still broken, she said. I know. Good. She came up the steps, stepping over the board with the familiar step around of someone who remembered. It would have felt wrong if you'd fixed it. He took her bag. She didn't argue about it. They went inside. The house was warm. The fire was going. She stood in the living room for a moment and looked at it, at the reading chair, at the shelves, at the particular amber morning light through the windows that hit this room differently in February than it had in October, more horizontal, more direct, less forgiving and more honest. It's good to be here, she said, quietly, to the room as much as to him. Yeah, he said, it is. They talked for most of the morning the way they'd learned to talk. Not efficiently, not in a line, but in the way that mattered, doubling back and going sideways and stopping when something needed to be stopped at. She told him about the last weeks of the fellowship, the piece she'd almost filed and then pulled back and rewrote from the first sentence, because she'd realized she'd been writing the story she expected instead of the one she'd found. The editor, who told her it was the best thing she'd submitted, the moment in a community center in Morocco, in the third country, in the last week, when she'd been interviewing a man about his family's energy access situation and realized she was no longer afraid of the story mattering to her, that she'd stopped bracing for the cost of it. I used to protect myself from caring too much, she said. They were sitting on the porch despite the February cold. She'd said she wanted air, he'd found blankets. They'd compromised in the way 2 people compromised when they'd been paying attention to each other long enough to know what the other one actually needed. About the people in the stories, I thought it would compromise the work. Too close, too personal, you lose the perspective. But I was wrong, or I was right in theory and wrong in practice. She had her coffee and the blanket and was looking out at the field, still brown and frost flat in February. Caring made the writing better, not because it made it warmer or more sentimental, it made it more precise, because I was paying attention in a different way. Because it mattered. Because it mattered, she agreed. And I'd spent years making things matter less so they couldn't hurt me, and I'd managed it. Nothing hurt me much, but nothing moved me much either. She looked at him. That's not a trait I want to keep making. He looked at her steadily. What changed? She held his gaze. Honestly? Always. You, she said. Not in the grand romantic sense, but sitting across from you at that restaurant and having the photograph on the table and choosing to be honest about it instead of guarded about it, that was the first time in years I'd chosen to let something be as complicated as it actually was, instead of simplifying it so it would hurt less. She paused. And the world didn't end, and I didn't fall apart. And I went to London, and I wrote the realest things I've written, and I think... She stopped. I think the door was that dinner. I think you opening it, or me opening it, or us both standing there at the same time. I think that was the beginning of something I didn't know I needed to start. Nathan was quiet for a moment. The field stretched out in front of them, bare and patient. A crow moved across the sky at the tree line, unhurried. Can I tell you what these 3 months were for me? He said. Yes. They were the first time I've lived in my own life since Rachel died. He said it plainly, without dressing it. Not performing it, not managing it, living in it, with Lily, in the house, doing the work that matters and leaving the work that doesn't. He paused. I didn't do it because you asked me to. I did it because you saw something that was possible and named it, and once someone names something accurately, you can't unknow it. She looked at him. The February light was the kind that showed things as they were, no atmospheric flattery, and in it she looked at him with the full, complicated attention she gave to things that mattered. You're different, she said. So are you. Yes. She looked back at the field. We've both been changed by the same season. They sat in that for a while. The cold was real but not uncomfortable, the kind that kept you present. Somewhere in the woods at the property's edge, a branch moved. Elena. He said her name the way he'd learned to say it, without asking anything from it, just placing it in the air as a fact. I know, she said. I told you I'd ask again when you came back. I know you did. So I'm asking. He looked at her directly. Not performing steadiness, actually steady, the way you were steady when you'd done the work of knowing what you wanted and had stopped being afraid that wanting it would cost you something you couldn't afford. Not what happens next, not a plan. Just, are you here? In the way that means something? She looked at the field for a long moment. He let her look. He had learned that some of the most important things Elena Brooks had ever said came after a silence he might once have filled. I'm scared, she said finally. I know. Not of you specifically, of... She seemed to be finding the words for something she'd been turning over for weeks. Of building something and watching it matter and then losing it. I've gotten very good at not building things, so I don't have to watch them fall. She looked at him. You know something about that. I do, he said. Exactly that. And you're still asking. Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. The crow had gone. The field held its February stillness. The farmhouse sat behind them, old and imperfect, and full of the specific history of people who had lived and lost and tried to keep going. I came back, she said, not as deflection, as an answer. I could have gone anywhere. The fellowship has a second phase. There were opportunities in Berlin and Sao Paulo. I came back to New York. She held his gaze. That's an answer to your question. It's not a neat one, but it's the true one. He nodded. He didn't push it past what it was. That's enough, he said. Is it? Yes. Because the rest is just time and showing up, and I'm good at those things when I'm paying attention. He paused. I'm paying attention now. Something in her face shifted. Not broke, not gave way. Shifted, the way a foundation shifted when it was settling into something solid rather than sinking. She looked like a person who had been holding a specific weight for a long time and was considering, carefully and with full awareness of the risk, setting part of it down. "Okay," she said. The same word she'd said in the Park Slope coffee place the first week they'd met again. But this one had different weight. This one meant something closer to yes. He reached across the space between them, not dramatically, not with announcement, and put his hand over hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. Her hand was cold from the February air. She looked down at it. Then she turned her hand over and held his, and they sat like that on the porch with the frost-flat field in front of them, and said nothing for a while because nothing needed to be said. And they'd both learned, from different directions, that silence that didn't need filling was its own form of arrival. Lily found out the way Lily found out most things, by asking directly and waiting for an honest answer. It was the following Sunday, all three of them at the kitchen table in Nathan's apartment, doing what had become a loosely recurring Sunday thing without anyone formally declaring it. Lily's schoolwork, Elena's writing, Nathan's company reading, all happening in the same room at the same time. The particular domesticity of people who'd grown comfortable with each other's presence without needing to constantly perform it. Lily looked up from her worksheet and looked at Elena and then at her father and then back at Elena. "Are you his girlfriend now?" she asked. The adults exchanged a look. Not a panicked one, just the look of two people who had been found out by a 7-year-old and were deciding how to handle it with the seriousness it deserved. "We're figuring it out," Nathan said. Lily considered this with the patience of someone accustomed to adults taking longer than necessary to arrive at obvious conclusions. "Figuring it out means yes, but you're being careful," she said. "That's a fair interpretation," Elena said. "Gerald knew before I did," Lily said, returning to her worksheet. "He said so in October." "Gerald said so in October," Nathan repeated. "He's perceptive." Lily erased something on her worksheet with focused attention. "I think it's good. You were lonely before and now you're less lonely. And Elena was—" She paused, looked at Elena. "Were you lonely before?" Elena looked at this child with her Rachel eyes and her Nathan stubbornness and her own particular third quality. And her face did the thing it did when something hit somewhere real and she didn't quite have the control she thought she had. "Yes," she said honestly, "I was." Lily nodded, satisfied. "Then it's good for both of you," she said. "That's what good things are supposed to do. They're good for both people, not just one." Nathan looked at his daughter. "Where do you get these things?" "I think of them myself." She was writing again, unconcerned. "I told you." Elena caught Nathan's eye across the table, and the look between them was one of those looks that didn't need translation, warm and complicated and a little undone, the look of two people who have both been quietly cracked open by the same 7-year-old and are acknowledging it to each other without saying so. "Back to work," Nathan said, because someone had to, and Lily was already there. "What? There were hard days." This is important to say because the story is not one that resolves into smoothness, and smoothness was never what any of them were aiming for. There was a Tuesday in March when Nathan came home late, not late from hiding, late from a crisis at a deployment site in Georgia, where a contractor had made decisions that set the community program back 6 weeks and required Nathan's direct involvement. And Elena was at the apartment with Lily, and dinner had gone cold, and Lily was asleep, and Elena was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop and said nothing when he walked in, which was a particular kind of silence that meant she was holding something. "I know," he said, before she could speak. "I'm not angry," she said, "but I want to tell you that when you didn't call, I know, I should have called. It's not about the phone call." She looked at him. "It's about the moment when you had the choice to let me in to what was happening and you didn't. You went into managing mode and I was outside it." She paused. "That's the old version. I need you to notice when you're doing that." He sat down across from her. The kitchen smelled like the dinner she'd made and he hadn't eaten. Outside, the city was its usual uncaring self. "You're right," he said. "I went somewhere I thought I had to go alone and I didn't stop to question it." "You don't have to go places alone anymore," she said. Not as a demand, as a fact she was putting on the table for him to pick up or leave. He picked it up. "I know. I'm still learning." "I know you are." She looked at him steadily. "So am I. I almost left tonight, before you got home. I was going to go back to my apartment and let the distance be an answer to the question I didn't want to ask. Why didn't you? She was quiet for a moment. Because Lily asked me to stay for dinner, and because leaving felt like the old version of me, and I'm trying to be the new one. She paused. And because I looked at the octopus habitats along the wall and thought about a kid who builds ecosystems with accuracy, because she understands that things need the right environment to survive. And I thought, I can ask for what I need directly instead of just removing myself when I don't get it. He looked at her. At the tired, real, unflattening face of someone doing the hard work of being honest about what she needed instead of protecting herself from needing it. What do you need? He said. For you to call next time. She held his gaze. And to mean it. Not because I asked, but because you actually understand that I'm part of this now. You are, he said. You have been for a while. I'm sorry I acted like you weren't tonight. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she got up and put his dinner in the microwave and came back and sat down and opened her laptop again. It's a process, she said. We're both in it. Yeah, he said. Don't do it again. I won't. She nodded. The microwave beeped. He got his dinner. They sat at the kitchen table in the middle of the night, in the middle of a city that didn't care, and worked through the rest of the evening in the particular imperfect companionship of two people who had decided that showing up honestly was worth more than showing up perfectly. Oh, spring came the way it did in New York, grudgingly, in fits, with cold reversals just when you thought it had committed. By April, the trees in the park were making their argument again, and Lily had begun planning a summer marine biology camp that she intended to attend and also significantly improve with her suggestions. One Saturday morning, Nathan woke up at 7 and lay in bed for a moment in the particular stillness before the apartment came alive, and he thought about where he was. Not geographically, in the larger sense. He was 32 years old. He ran a company that was doing meaningful work, not perfect work, not work without setbacks or failures, but work that built things that lasted, in communities that needed them, by people who were trusted to do it well, without him supervising every decision. He had a daughter who was 7 going on 40, and who had recently informed him that she intended to publish a book about cephalopods, and that she would need his help with the footnotes. He had a woman in his life who was not there because he was powerful, or because she needed anything from him except what he actually had to offer, which was presence and honesty, and the willingness to be wrong and correct course without making it a larger drama than it needed to be. He was not the man he'd been 3 years ago. He was not entirely the man he'd been at 23 either, though he'd made a partial peace with that younger version. The brilliant, cowardly, hungry boy in the photograph. The one who had believed in something real enough to build it and had not yet learned that building things required you to decide what you were willing to lose. He knew now. He'd lost enough to know. And knowing hadn't destroyed him. It had just made him more careful about what he reached for and more honest about why. He got up, made coffee. Lily appeared at 7:15 in pajamas with Gerald and her cephalopod book and the morning expression of someone who had been awake for a while and was being patient about it. Elena came in at 8, carrying the specific surplus of energy of a person who had slept well and had ideas. She'd been working on a new piece, a long one, about the intersection of energy access and educational outcomes, the thing she'd been building in her head since London. I figured something out, she said, sitting at the kitchen table without ceremony, pulling out her notebook. Coffee first, Nathan said. Coffee, and then tell me what you figured out, Lily corrected, pouring cereal with one hand and holding Gerald with the other. Elena accepted the coffee and looked at them both. At the man at the counter and the child at the table and the Saturday morning apartment with its octopus habitats and its windowsill stones and its poster on the refrigerator, and she had a look on her face that Nathan had learned to recognize, the look of someone storing something, the look she had in the farmhouse in October when she'd sat in the reading chair and watched him build the fire, the look that said she was registering something real and choosing to let it matter. What? He said. She shook her head. Nothing. Tell me about your week. You tell me about yours, Lily said. Did you interview anyone interesting? A woman in the Bronx, Elena said. 67 years old. She's been fighting for grid improvements in her neighborhood for 11 years. She has a 3-ring binder with every letter she's ever sent to every official who's ever ignored her. It's the most organized thing I've ever seen. What's her name? Dorothy. Lily nodded with the gravity of someone acknowledging a serious person. Dorothy should win, she said. I think so too, Elena said. I'm going to write it so that people understand why. Nathan looked at his daughter and at Elena and at the Saturday morning unfolding around them, imperfect, ordinary, completely real, and felt the thing he'd been feeling more frequently these past months, the thing he'd stopped being afraid to name. It was not happiness the way people performed happiness. It was not the resolved, tied-up version. It was the messier, quieter, more durable thing. The feeling of being in the right place in your own life, not because everything was in order, but because the people across the table were real and the work was real, and you were paying attention to both. Lily was explaining to Elena the correct way to cite a source in a footnote, which she had apparently researched. Elena was listening with full attention and asking follow-up questions. Nathan drank his coffee and said nothing because he didn't need to say anything, and he'd learned, slowly, with effort, with help from people who were patient enough to keep showing him, that knowing when to be quiet and let the good things be what they were was its own form of wisdom. The city went about its Saturday outside, the park filled with the usual believers in spring. The light came in through the kitchen windows at the honest angle of a morning that wasn't trying to be anything other than what it was. This was it, not the destination. There was no destination. That was the lesson. There was only the ongoing work of showing up and being honest and choosing the people in front of you over the ones in your head. But this was it. The beginning of the rest of the thing, built on the actual materials. Two people who had hurt each other and been honest about it. A child who had known what mattered before the adults did. A farmhouse with a porch board that still needed replacing. A company doing real work in the world. And the daily, imperfect, necessary practice of being present in your own life long enough to notice that it was, in fact, the one worth having. Nathan Archer had spent a decade building things. He'd built a company that would outlast any particular version of himself. He'd built a reputation that had its own gravity. He'd built walls that had kept him functional and kept everything real at a manageable distance. He was building something different now. Slower, harder to measure, without the clean metrics of a quarterly report or a board approval. The kind of building that happened in the same kitchen every morning, in the same conversations, in the same willingness to call when you were going to be late, and to stay when you wanted to leave, and to ask what someone needed instead of deciding what they could handle. It was not his greatest achievement in the way the company was, but it was the one that, when he looked at his daughter's face across the breakfast table on a Saturday morning in April, felt like something that would last. And that, he had finally learned, was the whole point.